Fang Tianfeng's position in the Flame God Kingdom was second only to the Divine Spirit, the Flame God. This status demanded respect even from the current Lord of the Shi Kingdom. As Fang Tianfeng entered the Grand Hall, she casually scanned around before finding a scat. Her demeanor and attitude exuded an air of superiority. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. In his heart, he couldn't help but sigh. If only I had half her charm. The thought of her soon heading to the space-time river where the Qixin Temple was located made him envious. Reincarnation was truly an art. Obviously, he wasn't very successful in this aspect. He wondered how the others were faring. Hu Qing had warned him not to go to the ancient moon ruins. But enough about Fang Tianfeng. What about the others? Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. Perhaps the luck of the others was also good. Under the operation of the supreme law rules, they might all have bright futures. Wu Zhuo and the others were not lacking in talent. With a little entry into some major powers, they could become geniuses. Becoming the universe master wasn't difficult. It was just hard to find. Ili's current reputation only circulated in the ancient Wood continent and didn't affect the entire realm. But it would soon change. He was about to make a name for himself in the ancient moon. Once the Wanlu was unlocked, his reputation would surely skyrocket. At that time, if the others were doing well, they could also seek refuge. However, he didn't know that the others might not be doing as well as him, for example, Wu Zhuo. At this moment, he was trapped in the Wu Hua secret realm, and he encountered unprecedented difficulties. In this dilemma, he also unexpectedly met a truly influential figure. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Feng Zhou. I will be hosting this auction. The rules remain the same as before. You can settle with primordial stones or with treasures of equal value. When encountering essential treasures, you can also bid by lighting the sky lantern. Sky lantern? Jian Wushuang was a bit puzzled upon hearing this. Luckily, Sword Immortal Tonghe was sitting beside him. He learned about the function of the sky lantern from the other party. Once the sky lantern is lit, it means endless bidding. It only stops when no one else bids. In other words, once the sky lantern is lit, there's no need to bid oneself. Just watch others bid, as it will always outbid them. Upon hearing this, Jian Wushuang thought to himself, only a fool would light the sky lantern. However, Sword Immortal Tonghe casually remarked, the first time I participated, I once lit the sky lantern. That treasure was extremely useful to me, even a chance to break through the seventh tribulation. For that treasure, I even sold several epochs of my life to the Shi Kingdom. Selling life. Jian Wushuang was quite surprised. There's nothing to be surprised about. At that time, I couldn't produce so many treasures and primordial stones. In the end, it was the strongmen of the Shi Kingdom who guaranteed it for me. I got that treasure, and then repaid the favor by fighting for the royal family of the Shi Kingdom several times. Tonghe spoke plainly, but only he knew that during those battles he almost perished. He even killed a universe master of the same level. The battles of the Shi Kingdom were not the conflicts of the ancient Wood continent. They were the contests over outer domain secret realms. There were many outer domain secret realms, but most were occupied by some major forces. Only some extremely dangerous secret realms, which even the superpowers couldn't suppress, remained unclaimed, such as the Wu Hua secret realm and the ancient moon ruins. These secret realms no one dared to touch. For a superpower like the Shi Kingdom, internal battles were meaningless. The resources of the ancient Wood continent were so scarce. Usually, battles were for the external contest of outer domain secret realms. Hearing about the rumors of the secret realms, Jian Wushuang's heart stirred. He had learned a lot about the outer domain regions in the past. The so-called outer domain regions were places beyond the 9 heavens and 10 lands. They were extremely dangerous with many natural secret realms. Even universe masters would venture there. Naturally, there were many opportunities. If it weren't for Wu Li's plan, he would probably have gone to the outer domain regions. But with Wu Li's plan, unlocking the Wanlu was the best choice, because the dangers within the Wanlu were relatively smaller. Venturing into the outer domain posed much greater risks. Even universe masters of the Sixth Tribulation faced the threat of demise. The Wanlu Divine Tree was different. The danger lay in how to confront the strong individuals of the ancient Wood continent upon venturing out. Internally, the risks were not as significant. At least there were no competitors. In the outer domain, within some universe secret realms, there were many old monsters. There were also many unique life forms. For an emperor like him, even if his strength could rival that of the Fifth Tribulation, going there was extremely dangerous. The Tongha chuckled lightly before continuing. You'll understand when you succeed in the future. The dangers in the outer territories also represent opportunities. Jian Wushuang nodded in agreement. Behind every crisis lay immense opportunities, just like his current situation. Facing the formidable Mieshang also presented the opportunity to control the cycle of reincarnation. Even Mieshang coveted it greatly, coming from the starry sky, seeking the master of life. If he could defeat Mieshang, he could devour the master of death, control reincarnation, and grasp spacetime. It was even possible to surpass the universe masters, just like those ancient existences. With confidence comes determination. Jian Wushuang clenched his fists. The auction officially commenced at this moment. Feng Zhou waved his hand casually, and a huge jade pillar appeared on the high platform in the hall. At the top of the pillar, an object was floating at this moment. Esteemed guests, this treasure is the heaven-defying supreme treasure from the Wu Hua secret realm, the Qingyan divine water. All universe masters are aware that during the Fifth Tribulation, the cataclysmic flame divine mountain will descend into the universe. Origin source. With this item, that tribulation will no longer be a tribulation. After Feng Zhuo's introduction, many universe masters of the Fourth Tribulation turned their attention. The universe master transcended his own tribulation, not just his personal ordeal, but also the tribulation of the universe itself. The fundamental universe also experiences tribulations. Ordinary personal tribulations can be anticipated, and one wouldn't attempt to transcend them without confidence. However, the supreme tribulation within the fundamental universe is different. It requires not only personal strength, but also the strength of the universe's origin source. If the origin source of the universe cannot withstand it, even immense divine power is futile. Most practitioners of divine power in the ancient moon spacetime are not strong in origin source. So for them, personal tribulations are not difficult. It's the supreme tribulations of the universe that pose a challenge. This reminded Jian Wushuang of Qixin. Qixin failed in his tribulation, yet the origin source of the fundamental universe persisted. Later, it evolved into Qixin Temple. Qixin, who cultivated the origin source, fell under his personal tribulation, but the fundamental universe did not perish. He could have chosen to transcend as a scattered tribulation, but it would have required abandoning the origin source of the universe. For the sake of the fundamental universe, Qixin would rather sacrifice his own universe. He was truly ruthless, but perhaps the reasons behind it were not as simple as they seemed. Jian Wushuang, on the other hand, was different. His personal tribulations corresponded to the intensity of his divine power. His divine power now surpassed even the origin source. While the supreme tribulation within the universe origin source was formidable, it still couldn't compare to the starry sky evolved from the extreme Tao. The first universe was about to illuminate. Once the universe coalesced successfully, it became a perfect cosmos with myriad black holes, owned by the origin source of the starry sky. The supreme tribulation wasn't as terrifying for Jian Wushuang as one might think. He balanced both aspects. Jian Wushuang was the tribulation of these myriad realms. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so confident. The first 5 tribulations were as simple to him as drinking water. The difficulty arose after the 6th tribulation. But there was always a way. Now, he had treasure capable of breaking through the 5th tribulation universe master. In the future, there would be treasures for the 6th tribulation as well. Of course, while treasures played a significant role, one couldn't ignore oneself. Nor could one underestimate the supreme law rules. Everything was subject to change. The first item up for auction was a heaven-defying treasure for a 4th tribulation universe master. For a moment, Many strong individuals bid one after another. Among them were even those of the seventh tribulation. Even if they couldn't use it themselves, they could pass it down to their descendants. Such treasures were rare. The Wu Hua secret realm was inaccessible to ordinary people, and even fewer could come out once they entered. This Qingyan divine water was within the innermost part of the Wu Iiua secret realm. Without the strength of a sixth tribulation universe master, one couldn't obtain it. Some people might go their whole lives without encountering such a treasure. Naturally, it was highly treasured. The items auctioned here had no low prices. As long as one bid, it was likely to be the corresponding price for the treasure. But scarcity of the treasure was undeniable. Next to Jian Wushuang sat Tonghe, who also called out a price at this moment. 10,000 primordial stones. The previous bid was 7,000, and Tonghe directly added 3,000 primordial stones. Many fourth tribulation universe masters fell into despair. As for those of the third tribulation, their value might not even reach 5,000 primordial stones. Although, in one era, the universe origin source could at least produce one primordial stone as a minimum. However, who would hold onto treasures without using them? Whether it's purchasing treasures, secret techniques, or even nurturing one's own universe origin source, it all revolves around the primordial stones. For an ordinary universe master, being able to produce 5,000 primordial stones is already quite impressive. That requires 5,000 epochs to condense. Even a universe master at the fourth tribulation needs 500 epochs. That's still a relatively long time. Seeing Senior Tonghe making a bid, Jian Wushuang couldn't help but ask curiously, "Is Senior preparing this for Miss Minger?" Ilaha. That little girl still has worldly desires. When she's had her fill of playing, this treasure should come in handy. Tonghe chuckled. It makes sense. Li Minger is the only relative of Tonghe. The day her worldly desires fade away might be when she embarks on the path of cultivation. Naturally, Tonghe has to prepare in advance. In this place, a universe master at the sixth tribulation is also a top figure. But those crazed universe masters at the fourth tribulation have already begun selling off their assets. I bid 9,000 primordial stones, plus a treasure from the fifth tribulation. A fourth tribulation universe master sitting further back shouted loudly. Once someone starts selling treasures, others follow suit. The value of treasures from the universe is actually not that high. The real value lies in the treasures nurtured by oneself. A treasure from the fifth tribulation is considered good if it's worth 3,000 primordial stones. The subsequent bids kept rising. Tonghe also made several consecutive bids, but in the end it wasn't acquired. It was bought by a crazed fourth tribulation universe master. This universe master is at the pinnacle of the fourth tribulation, with less than 100 epochs left before transcending the tribulation. During this time, they have been searching everywhere for treasures to aid in transcending the tribulation. It was also luck that they encountered the Qingyan divine water here. They practically emptied their coffers, spending 99,000 primordial stones to obtain this Qingyan divine water. He left hastily right after snapping the picture, not out of fear of being watched, but because he was anxious to prepare for his tribulation crossing. In this place, attendees entered the auction through different passages. Jian Wushuang entered through a narrow alley, while others came from various parts of the city. As long as their routes differed and their auras were concealed within the city, nobody could detect them. That's why some dared to risk their entire fortune. The first item up for auction was a significant one, likely to fetch a high price. The subsequent items, though precious, lacked the exceptional quality of the first, so their prices remained within the range of several thousand primordial stones. Even if it reached several thousand primordial stones, Jian Wushuang didn't have the means to bid. He could only watch. The ninth item up for auction, a spatial crystal. This item was the supreme material for crafting treasures. Many attendees were divine craftsmen, and they began bidding fervently. Divine craftsmen and forge masters were valued much higher than individuals of the same level, so very few outsiders dared to compete. Just a single piece of spatial crystal fetched a high price of 10,000 primordial stones. Jian Wushuang's eyes gleamed with envy. Spatial crystals were rare formations condensed from cosmic bodies, considered crystallized manifestations of the universe, and the toughest material in existence. The value of just one piece equaled 10,000 primordial stones. Jian Wushuang carefully examined the treasures from the Chen family, which he had once found impenetrable. He had even inspected them at the workshops of the Shi Kingdom. While they were cherished treasures, they were not exorbitantly priced. Moreover, the Chen family only had one universe master, and their reserves of primordial stones were almost useless, not even enough for their own use as a universe master. So, he couldn't find a single primordial stone among them. Next time, if they were to undertake such a task again, they would have to deal with those universe masters. Scattering tribulation was too impoverished. Every scattering tribulation, before becoming one, surely squandered all their treasures on the universe origin source, only to fail in crossing the tribulation, naturally losing everything. All of them were penniless, except for the divine Forge Master. Even though Jian Wushuang's eyes lit up at the sight of those treasures, it was of no use. No one else is bidding, so this spatial crystal. Before Feng Jiu could finish her sentence, she was interrupted by a hoary voice. It was Lian Xing, the strongest divine Forge Master of the ancient Wood continent. Lian Xing slowly raised 2 fingers and spoke. I bid 20,000. As soon as this statement was made, the entire venue fell silent. No one dared to bid again. Even the strong ones at the 7th tribulation level shrank back. As for those divine Forge Masters, almost all of them knew Lian Xing, regarding him as the top divine Forge Master of the ancient Wood continent. The ancestor of them all. Who would dare to vie with Lian Xing for materials? In fact, Lian Xing could have just bid 1 primordial stone at the beginning, and no one would dare to compete. Background, strength, wealth, all utterly overwhelming others. Who would dare to contend? Even if an 8th tribulation expert came, they might not prevail. Lian Xing's wealth was beyond the reach of ordinary people. One person could match a superpower. Just the puppets Jian Wushuang encountered. Their value was beyond what a 7th tribulation expert could afford. Feng Jiu, the auctioneer, upon seeing Lian Xing's bid, appeared rather relaxed, and directly began the final bidding. After 3 calls, there was no response. The spatial crystal fell into Lian Xing's hands. The auction continued. Along with the spatial crystals, several subsequent treasures were also materials for refining. Jian Wushuang hadn't heard of some of them before, so he simply watched. At this point, he didn't hold much hope anymore. Even if there were treasures to help him break through to the level of Universe Master, the prices would likely be exorbitant. He simply couldn't afford them. The treasures he had gathered from the Chun family couldn't even compare. Only the Origin Stone Mountain was worth considering. The other treasures didn't hold much appeal for a Universe Master. Among the treasures he acquired from the Chen family, although there were several, they were all at the level of the 3rd tribulation. The only treasure at the 4th tribulation was one that the Chun family openly displayed. He had long since devoured its essence, rendering it useless. Even if he could sell it, its value probably wouldn't exceed 100 primordial stones. Universe treasures. Those below the 5th tribulation were almost worthless. Of course, for an emperor, their value would be considerable. However, with Jian Wushuang's increasing strength, his perspective had to evolve gradually. He couldn't remain fixated on the Qixin Temple era. During that time, he lacked much insight. But things were different now that he had entered the ancient moon spacetime. The places he frequented and the people he encountered were all significant figures. Whether in the Yu Kingdom, the Daughter Kingdom, or the current Shi Kingdom, he knew quite a few powerful individuals. Beside him was Sword Immortal Tonghe, a universe master at the 6th tribulation. Though not one of the strong figures of the ancient Wood continent, he was still a prominent figure here. A universe master at the 6th tribulation was almost equivalent in status and strength to a dispersed tribulation powerhouse at the 7th tribulation. Lian Xing was a well-known figure. Throughout the ancient Wood continent, hardly anyone was unaware of him. Through interactions with these individuals, he gained much knowledge and insight, broadening his horizons. It was like getting an early introduction to the circle of universe masters and learning a lot about them. From the subsequent auctions, he learned a great deal. For example, among the treasures auctioned later, there were 2 items particularly beneficial for crossing the tribulation. One was the heavenly Tao spiritual qi condensed from the space of gold. This treasure actually intrigued him quite a bit because it would be extremely useful when breaking through to become a universe master. The golden rule corresponded to the laws of space. The heavenly qi condensed by the golden law rules. That was the power required when mastering the universe in the third tribulation. It could enable the strong in the third tribulation to quickly grasp the universe. Unfortunately, this treasure was snapped up by Fan Tianfeng at a very high price. With countless primordial stones, Jian Wushuang simply couldn't afford it. Fan Tianfeng's move to acquire this treasure most likely meant he was preparing for a breakthrough. She used to cultivate the origin source of spacetime. Now she's specializing in divine power, but the foundation of the origin source hasn't been neglected. The first 3 tribulations are too easy for Fan Tianfeng now. So the treasure she's preparing is also essential for mastering the universe. Once she breaks through, she'll probably soon face the highest tribulation. By swiftly passing through the first 3 tribulations, she'll directly master the universe in the tribulation realm. The first 3 tribulations focus on one's own divine body, which is nothing for someone as wealthy as Fan Tianfeng. Jian Wushuang is the same. Once he becomes a tribulation realm expert, he can swiftly pass the tribulations and reach the third tribulation realm, directly mastering the universe. Only after becoming the universe master would the universe origin source face the highest tribulation. The highest tribulation was divided into 7 types. After mastering the universe, there was a minor tribulation which is about space, namely gold. 4th tribulation, wood 5th tribulation, fire 6th tribulation, water 7th tribulation, earth 8th tribulation. Mastery of time. If the first 7 tribulations are still about space, then the 8th tribulation, for cultivators, is like a dimensional strike, directly shifting from space to time. This is fine for origin source cultivators. But for those cultivating divine power, it's a huge gap. This is also why there are so few tribulation realm experts in ancient moon spacetime. The 8th tribulation was exceptionally rare. So many cultivators pursue the so-called one force breaking 10,000 law rules. Breaking the highest law rules, ascending through divine power to become revered, was a feat no one had accomplished. In the ancient moon spacetime, this feat had never been witnessed throughout the ages. Even Jian Wushuang himself wasn't entirely sure of it. His greatest confidence lay in his temporal path. His own divine power was sufficient to withstand the tribulations of the divine body. The primordial tribulations posed no great challenge to him. This was the benefit of dual cultivation. Entering the tribulation realm, he didn't need to suppress anything during tribulation crossings. The first 5 tribulations would pass smoothly. However, achieving the tribulation realm was somewhat difficult. Although the universe space formed around him, he lacked comprehension of time. Merely devouring the origin source wasn't enough. He needed to cultivate insight. Currently, he could only ponder over the chess pieces within the Skysight heavenly chessboard and derive understanding from them. At least progress wasn't slow anymore. Al had already comprehended the true meaning of time. He was just a step away from mastery. Once he grasped this mastery, he could enter the tribulation realm. Amidst the myriad opportunities, he hoped to find what he needed. These thoughts lingered in Jian Wushuang's mind. This auction was his last chance. He simply didn't have enough primordial stones to purchase the auxiliary treasures. He could only watch helplessly as Lian Xing and Fan Tianfeng sporadically bought materials for treasures, sparking envy in him. Perhaps, after becoming the universe master, he wouldn't lack primordial stones anymore. An ordinary universe master of the third tribulation could nurture anywhere from 1 to 10 primordial stones in an era. This was heavily influenced by the essence of the universe. But he was different. By the time he became the universe master, his universe origin source would likely surpass that of his peers by an immeasurable amount. Moreover, he could rapidly advance to become a universe master of the 5th tribulation realm. In the ancient moon spacetime, a universe master of the fifth tribulation realm typically produced 100 primordial stones in an era. With his foundational strength, a 100-fold increase was not an issue. That would be 10,000 primordial stones in an era. Although it seemed like a long time, even an emperor could typically undergo hundreds or thousands of eras in a single seclusion. At that moment, his wealth would multiply. He wouldn't be in such an awkward situation now. Buzz! A pulling force emanated from the auction stage, causing Jian Wushuang to furrow his brow slightly. Then, his pupils began to contract. At this moment, Feng Zhou once again brought out an item for auction. The Nine Tribulations Tower, originating from the ancient moon ruins. Initially, many people didn't pay much attention to this 9-layered tower, but when they heard about the ancient moon ruins, they all turned their heads. The ancient moon ruins were the most formidable secret realm within the ancient moon spacetime. It was rumored to contain the inheritance of the heavenly maiden. But no one could enter its core. Not even the inner circle could penetrate it. Even the outer circle required a universe master of the sixth tribulation to enter. In other words, this item must have been brought out by at least a universe master of the sixth tribulation realm. An item from the ancient moon ruins. This meant that its price would reach an extremely high figure. Those weaker than universe masters of the sixth tribulation basically had no chance. I bid 50,000. A middle-aged man in a black robe stood up directly. The aura emanating from him revealed the presence of an ancient figure at the seventh tribulation. Though he was a scattered tribulation expert, he still possessed considerable strength. Jian Wushuang was momentarily stunned, thinking to himself, "These people don't even know the purpose of the Nine Tribulations Tower, yet they dare to bid?" At the same time, a universe master at the sixth tribulation also spoke up. "I bid 180,000 primordial stones." Goodness! 180,000 primordial stones. This price. It was already the highest bid at the auction. 180,000 primordial stones. Sure enough, being a universe master meant having deep pockets. With the serious decline in power due to being scattered across realms and lacking the primordial stones condensed from the universe origin source, they couldn't compete with the universe master in terms of wealth. After reaching 180,000, the price fell into a brief calm. Jian Wushuang took the opportunity to ask Sword Immortal Tonghe, "Senior Tonghe, does the Nine Tribulations Tower have any special function?" "TSK Jian Wushuang, it's your first time attending this kind of auction, you may not know. But whenever treasures from the ancient moon ruins come out, nobody really knows their functions. Most of those put up for auction are things even the owners can't figure out, they just want quick cash. Those who truly understand them wouldn't put them up for auction. The treasures from the ancient moon ruins are the lowest grade universal treasures. And there are even innate primordial universe treasures." Sword Immortal Tonghe tapped his fingers on the armrest of his throne. His gaze fixed on the Nine Tribulations Tower, contemplating whether to make a move. The treasures that came out of the ancient moon ruins were extremely mysterious, almost like special treasures. Few people would put them up for auction, even if they couldn't figure them out themselves. They wouldn't want them to spread to the outside world. Otherwise, if someone else grasped them and realized they were losing out, they'd be furious. The Nine Tribulations Tower being put up for auction probably meant that the person behind it urgently needed primordial stones. Hearing Sword Immortal Tonghe's explanation, Jian Wushuang once again looked at the Nine Tribulations Tower. If that was the case, perhaps he wasn't very interested. He wasn't in dire need of treasures. Having the beast god's weapon was enough. With so many trump cards of his own, sometimes treasures could become a burden. But when the Nine Tribulations Tower appeared in the hall, the Sky-Sight 11ly chessboard within his origin stirred. The two seemed to have some kind of connection. This made Jian Wushuang consider whether he should intervene and buy the Nine Tribulations Tower. Observing the Sky-Sight heavenly chessboard, it was a treasure of spacetime. The value of the Nine Tribulations Tower would double if it resonated with the temporal treasure. Most importantly, the Sky-Sight heavenly chessboard was the treasure left to him by Master Xianxia. Maybe the Nine Tribulations Tower also had a connection with Teacher Xianxia. This forced him to take a risk. Of course, not to snatch it, but to buy it with his own money. Primordial stones. He didn't have any, but he possessed the life power that drove all scattered tribulations crazy. He could transform all things into life. Only he could do it. The life force at the level of an emperor, as long as refined, could help those scattered tribulations restore their divine bodies. It was time for him to take a gamble. He just couldn't blatantly reveal it. He had to carefully plan it out. There it is. Jian Wushuang's mouth curled up, and the avatar within the universe origin source took out a piece of finger. It was loosened from Dong Jun's skeleton. Originally, he was reluctant, but there was no other way. He had to take a gamble. A piece of Dong Jun's finger. It was already very valuable. Just this piece of finger, even if given to those strong at the sixth tribulation to absorb, it could enhance their divine power by about 100,000. This was a substantial enhancement. Those strong at the sixth tribulation, even scattered tribulations, also had about 700,000 divine power. An increase of 100,000 meant 800,000. It was a whole new level of improvement, multiplying their combat power several times over. In an auction, T would easily fetch 200,000 primordial stones. Of course, these 200,000 were far from enough. The severed finger perhaps could have been contended for by the experts of the sixth tribulation, as the life power it contained was potent enough to attract even those at the seventh tribulation, including Lien Xing himself. However, the life force couldn't be openly displayed. With a swish, the power of all things began to converge, then transformed into the essence of life. The emperor-level life force condensed once more, reaching the level of the tribulation realm. Repeatedly, the well-condensed life power was injected into this severed finger. Inside the hall, the auction continued. The price of the 9 tribulations tower had reached 300,000. Now, only the universe masters of the sixth tribulation and scattered tribulation experts of the seventh tribulation were bidding. Others had lost the qualification to compete. It wasn't because their financial resources couldn't keep up. Their ambitions couldn't. Universe masters of the sixth tribulation vied for it. They aimed for future transcending tribulations. Scattered tribulation experts of the seventh tribulation contested for their own strength and to maintain their status and family. What did the scattered experts of the sixth tribulation have? They had power, they had family, but they weren't superpowers. Even if the 9 tribulations tower's power defied the heavens, acquiring it would still be like holding onto a hot potato. So there was no need to vie for it. Fight for it, and preferably stall for a bit longer. Jian Wushuang's temples bulged. His whole body stiffened. This was a side effect. Forcing and rapidly converting life power had repercussions on oneself. It wasn't like when he revived Fuego, proceeding calmly and steadily. Now he was too rushed, even more so than during battles. He needed to condense life power that would entice the scattered tribulation experts of the seventh tribulation. Otherwise, bringing it out wouldn't hold much value. Using the remains of Dong Jun as the host, the powerful force of life gradually gathered. It took almost the time for an incense stick to burn. However, the number of strong bidders was dwindling. Some of the peak forces experts had stopped bidding altogether. From the side of the Shi Kingdom's royal family, the bid had reached 460,000 primordial stones. Brother Xiao, you should prepare for your tribulation. It's better to let this 9 tribulations tower belong to me. 500,000. After speaking, the elder who spoke first offered a price surpassing that of the Shi Kingdom's royal family. 500,000 primordial stones. Even for a seventh tribulation, it would require 50 epochs. Crucially, even the Shi Kingdom's royal family lacked a universe master at the seventh tribulation. For Xiao to condense it himself would require several hundred epochs. This was already a sky-high price. Xiao tapped the armrest of his throne, not out of hesitation but to contact several ancestors of the royal family to discuss the value of the 9 tribulations tower. Now, the bidding was no longer an individual's decision. Behind him were the strong members of the royal family. Xiao was on the verge of his tribulation, requiring a lot of primordial stones. I didn't need to spend a large sum on a treasure whose use was unknown. But the royal family was wealthy. Now he represented the royal family. As long as those ancestors were willing to pay, securing it was no problem. This was the Shi Kingdom. Ranked first among the 16 kingdoms of Qingqiao, it was a super-powerful divine nation. Their financial strength was unmatched. Snap! The sound of fingers tapping the stone throne echoed, and Xianxia received the command from the ancestors, giving him confidence in his heart. Looking at the old man who made the bid, he said leisurely, "Brother Lianxing, you're old, you shouldn't take this risk anymore." 800,000. Xianxia quoted a price directly, raising it to the highest. He raised it by a full 300,000 primordial stones. Lianxing, a strong figure at the seventh tribulation, didn't look too good. He wasn't a strong figure from the ancient Wood continent, but from the Black Heaven. He was also an ancestor of a force. Within his family, there was a universe master at the sixth tribulation. Securing the 9 tribulations tower, even if he couldn't use it himself, he could give it to the universe master of his family. But to really contend for it, he couldn't compete with the royal family of Shi Kingdom. Originally, he thought it was Xianxia contending for it. Now, seeing Xianxia bidding as if it cost nothing, he understood that the royal family of Shi Kingdom had made a move. It was uncontestable. "I la kid. Don't end up with it in your hands." Lianxing sneered, then closed his eyes. "Consider it giving up." Feng Jiawu, who was hosting the auction, also understood that there shouldn't be anyone bidding among the strong figures in the hall. The royal family of Shi Kingdom was sure to win. No one would dare to provoke them. As for malicious bidding, that would offend people. In fact, Lianxing could also contend for it. If he had the financial resources. The Shi family had a vast business but also many people. A large group of strong figures to support. Lianxing was different, he was alone. As for those disciples, not only did he not need to support them, but the disciples also had to show filial respect to him. Moreover, the profits from the divine casting workshop he established were terrifyingly high. The key was that he didn't need to personally craft treasures. His disciples were enough. Those disciples could only get 30% of the primordial stones. The rest went into Lianxing's hands. Still, there were countless people trying to come in before and after. But looking at Lianxing, there seemed to be no intention to bid. Perhaps he wasn't interested in this treasure. In fact, Lianxing had once crazily collected dozens of treasures rumored to have come from the ancient moon ruins, but none of them were usable. Based on his inspection, he found some strange treasures, all of which were just decorations. Utterly useless. Consequently, he didn't persist further, thus refraining from making a bid this time. There was actually another person in the hall capable of bidding. And once they did, the royal family of Shi Kingdom had to consider whether they should compete. That person was Fan Tianfeng. Her current status granted her the capability to contend. However, Fan Tianfeng was currently uninterested in these treasures. What mattered most to her was breaking through to become the universe master and then returning to the Qishan temple. She had reached a point where she no longer cared about treasures. Friend Xianxia bids 800,000. If no one else bids, the 9 tribulations tower will. Before Feng Jiawu finished her sentence, Jian Wushuang raised his arm, signaling to wait. He was going to make a bid. "I have a treasure to mortgage for auction." Jian Wushuang spoke directly. Upon seeing Jian Wushuang's bid, many people were stunned. Most of them didn't even recognize Jian Wushuang. The universe master of the sixth tribulation could see through Jian Wushuang's cultivation and realized he was just an emperor, causing a slight frown. There were only 2 emperors in the hall. It would have been normal if Fan Tianfeng had bid. But for Jian Wushuang, a random emperor, to dare to bid was truly surprising. It left many people bewildered. Even Sword Immortal Tonghe beside him hadn't expected Jian Wushuang to counterbid. Lianxing also stared at Jian Wushuang in astonishment, secretly speculating whether Jian Wushuang would really put up for auction the treasure that enhanced divine power. He knew Jian Wushuang had the beast god weapon, and the value of that treasure was indeed considerable. At least it was a universe treasure of the seventh tribulation. However, this seemed too risky. An emperor auctioning off strange treasures? There was no necessity for that. Either he was foolish or it was related to the 9 tribulations tower. Could it be? Fan Tianfeng looked at Jian Wushuang. She was the one in the hall who understood Jian Wushuang the best. Also hailing from the Qixin Temple, Fan Tianfeng couldn't help but admire Jian Wushuang's strength. Despite having countless resources for cultivation, she was still no match for Jian Wushuang. At this moment, Jian Wushuang's bid probably indicated he had truly seen through the secrets of the Nine Tribulations Tower. Xianxia, seeing that he was actually contending with an emperor, shifted his gaze, speculating about Jian Wushuang's background and the powerful figure behind him. He couldn't believe that an emperor could discern the uniqueness of the Nine Tribulations Tower. At this moment, the powerful figures of the Shi Kingdom's royal family also informed Xianxia of Jian Wushuang's identity. Xianxia realized the connection between Jian Wushuang and his grandson, which piqued his interest even more. After a brief investigation, he learned about the powerful individuals Jian Wushuang had befriended. The newly ascended universe master of the Seventh Tribulation, Yunji. The reclusive sword Immortal Tonghe, universe master of the Sixth Tribulation, residing in the Shi Kingdom. The number 1 divine forge master of the ancient Wood continent, Lianxing. The more he inquired, the more surprised Xianxia became. Jian Wushuang, a mere son-in-law of Yu Kingdom, had actually befriended such super-strong individuals simultaneously. And it was indeed true. Due to his affiliation with Yu Kingdom, Jian Wushuang first befriended Queen Yunji. Subsequently, through Queen Yunji, he got to know sword Immortal Tonghe. Their relationship deepened as both practiced the sword Dao. As for Lianxing, gratitude went to Fan Tianfeng, but it also owed to his own efforts. If his strength hadn't been extraordinary and gained Lianxing's favor, he wouldn't have been recommended to attend such auctions. Before becoming a son-in-law of Yu Kingdom, Jian Wushuang had already defeated Shi Kingdom's genius, Shizhou. It wasn't just luck. The most crucial factor was his strength. Her own strength was not remarkable, but when it came to appraising treasures, she was truly unparalleled. Otherwise, she would not be presiding over the auction. The vitality is so pure, Feng Jiawu exclaimed in surprise. This time, even the universe masters were stunned. The power of life. At the pinnacle of wood, the vitality found only among the Wanlu, the vitality most needed for the scattered tribulation. Jian Wushuang also feigned surprise, incredulously asking, "There's still vitality in this severed finger? Friend, you may not be in the tribulation realm, so you might not be very sensitive to the power of life. There is indeed vitality in this severed finger, but it's obscured by divine power. Even universe masters would find it difficult to detect." Feng Jiawu explained slowly, though inwardly, she felt a twinge of jealousy towards this fortunate lad. This was the power of life, the power that could drive the scattered tribulation mad. For instance, Lianxing, the Seventh Tribulation powerhouse who had previously contended for the Nine Tribulations Tower. He had completely lost interest in the tower now. Compared to vitality, all treasures were nothing but rubbish. What was most important for the scattered tribulation? Improving strength? That was simply impossible. Just surviving was considered lucky. Buying treasures, venturing out, wasn't it all just to acquire items that could sustain vitality, to maintain combat strength? In the face of the purest vitality, what did sustaining life even mean? This was about increasing life. Increasing life meant being able to return to the peak period. Divine power would naturally skyrocket. 100 benefits without any harm. Some of the scattered tribulation participants couldn't contain their excitement anymore, urging, "Feng Jiawu, why don't you extract the vitality from that severed finger so that we can bid for it?" Lianxing sneered coldly, his voice resolute. "No need for that. I'll offer 1 million primordial stones, along with this severed finger, to seal the deal." 1 million. The scattered tribulation experts in the Sixth Tribulation were now stirred. In truth, 1 million wasn't much. If one lacked enough primordial stones, they would sell off unnecessary treasures. They'd even sell the necessary ones if need be. "I'll offer 600,000 primordial stones, plus a universe master treasure from the 7 Tribulation." The one making the offer was a strong expert in the Sixth Tribulation. They even brought out treasures from the 7 Tribulation. It seemed they were willing to mortgage their key treasures, which was indeed insane. But this was just the beginning. Following that, scattered tribulation experts continued to bid. In an instant, it soared to 2 million primordial stones. Although Jian Wushuang knew deep down that bringing this out would cause a frenzy of contention, he hadn't anticipated the bidding to reach such heights. 2 million primordial stones already? Even Xianxia, who originally contested for the 9 Tribulation Tower, had now placed a bid, and it was dominating the scene. Clearly, they had received intel from within the royal family. The power of life. It was related to the strength and life and death battles of scattered tribulation experts. Naturally, they would vie for it. Don't forget, the wealth within major families was controlled by scattered tribulation experts. Take, for instance, the royal family of the Shi Kingdom. Among the universe masters, Xianxia was the strongest. But he was only in the 6th tribulation. He simply couldn't bear the brunt of the situation. Still, it required the suppression from ancestors at the 7th tribulation, even up to the 8th tribulation, to quell all parties. So, the power of this life must be obtained. In each auction, whenever the power of life appeared, someone would bid fervently for it. It was a must-win situation. Those below the 6th tribulation had no qualification to make bids anymore. Soon, it was the 7th tribulation, and various forces were madly scrambling for it. Jian Wushuang himself hadn't expected that the life power he had just infused would be so valuable. He was equally astonished. Fortunately, some people believed the reasons he fabricated. Sword Immortal Tonghe even envied him, saying, "Jian Wushuang, you're really lucky. The divine power contained in the severed finger is already valuable, and the life power within can even assist 8th tribulation experts. Its value is immeasurable. But how come I didn't notice it?" Jian Wushuang pretended to be clueless, playing his part well. He intentionally acted as if he knew nothing, and he even went on to inquire about the power of life. If anyone were to doubt Jian Wushuang, they would probably suspect that he had obtained some treasure trove from a mighty figure. They would never imagine that Jian Wushuang could wield the power of life. Currently, aside from a few individuals within Qishan Temple, no more than 5 people knew about his life power, excluding the oaths taken by several members of the Giant God Clan. The remaining ones were Zhenling of Qishan Temple, the archenemy Miesheng, and the last one in the ancient moon spacetime, Babidi. These 3, 2 of them hailed from the starry sky, and one of them wasn't even human. They were just true spirits condensed by the origin source of Qishan. Each one was extraordinary. Even the super-strong in ancient moon spacetime, despite being at the 8th tribulation, couldn't believe that someone could wield the power of life. However, he could only do such a thing once. If he were to reveal the power of life again, everyone would probably conclude that he had obtained a super-secret treasure trove. At that time, he would be like a mobile treasure trove, and it was likely that super beings would come to suppress him. Then he probed the soul and gained more life power. Jian Wushuang naturally wouldn't do such a thing a second time. The first time was an adventure. The second time would be courting death. Even though he had a second nascent soul, he wouldn't dare to be reckless. The second nascent soul had a miniature reincarnation. It could be considered a trump card left for future confrontations with Miesheng. If he won, he would control the reincarnation smoothly. If he lost, the second nascent soul would flee. Of course, he didn't want to lose. The treasures on his main body were too important. The primordial starry sky derived from the evolution of the extreme Tao could be said to be one of a kind. Not to mention the divine body, just the loss of the supreme treasures would be difficult for him to bear. Without the beast god weapon, without the skysight heavenly chessboard, then his combat power would be greatly reduced. If it weren't for the power of the blood color and the divine power enhancement bestowed by Babidi that time, he would only have up to 100,000 divine powers now. Without the beast god weapon enhancement, he would only be comparable to an emperor in the tribulation realm. Without comprehending the skysight heavenly chessboard, he would break through to the universe master, not knowing when it would happen. So he couldn't afford to lose, nor could he take risks in the ancient moon spacetime. He could only act dumb with all his might. Whether others believed it or not, he was almost convinced himself. It's already 3 million primordial stones. Jian Wushuang widened his eyes, his joy beyond words. In his heart, Jian Wushuang was still secretly evaluating Lianxing. This ancient wood continent's #1 divine craftsman was also a powerful scattered tribulation expert, although he didn't lack life power much. But facing such pure life force he brought out, he should also be tempted. If the other party also joined, he could earn a little more. Just as he was looking forward to it. On the side of Xianxia, he reached out his hand and said indifferently, "I, Xianxia, will light a sky lantern today. Continue." As soon as these words were spoken, many people in the hall fell silent. The sky lantern was lit. Naturally, there was no need to bid again, it was already implicitly the highest bid. Their bids were meaningless. Unless it was bankruptcy of the royal family of the Shi Kingdom. They could then buy this life power. So no one dared to bid again. Jian Wushuang was somewhat speechless. Wouldn't this push the price down? At the same time, he was also looking forward to someone daring to compete with the Shi Kingdom's royal family. Unfortunately, no one made a sound this time. Lianxing didn't have any intention of bidding. Just when Jian Wushuang felt that there was no hope, a voice broke the silence in the hall. "I bid 10 million primordial stones." Jian Wushuang knew the bidder, Fan Tianfeng. After bidding, he glanced at Jian Wushuang. Fan Tianfeng's bid caused the experts in the hall to be stunned. Outsiders all knew that the Flame God and the Shi Kingdom were practically tied together. He didn't expect to have an internal conflict. Xiao's expression was also a little ugly. 10 million primordial stones. He couldn't even afford it. Some of the experts from the Yu Kingdom's royal family were also somewhat puzzled by Fan Tianfeng's bid. They were also somewhat angry. Although the descendants of the Flame God were not unique special life forms, they would still have a tribulation and a supreme tribulation. However, there was only one 7th tribulation expert in the entire clan. Most of the experts under the Flame God were disciples. There were very few experts among the descendants. He wasn't too optimistic either. Although the only 7th tribulation expert failed to transcend the tribulation, with the help of the Flame God, his strength remained at its peak. There was no need for Fan Tianfeng to fight for the life power here. Feng Jiawu was also feeling a little awkward at this moment. She was even more jealous of Fan Tianfeng for being able to use the treasures in the Flame God Kingdom at will. 10 million primordial stones was the net worth of an average universe master at the 6th tribulation. As long as the sky lantern was not extinguished, it would be endless. After Fan Tianfeng reported 10 million, Xianxia remained unmoved. He only passed on what had happened here to the royal family. 10 million primordial stones was indeed a huge fortune to an individual. However, for a royal family that had existed for countless years, this was nothing. The main reason was that Fan Tianfeng's bid was targeted at the royal family. An emperor. They were just ants. However, she had the Flame God behind her, so they had to take her seriously. Now, everyone knew that the Flame God was the #1 expert of the ancient Wood continent. The divine Wood King was about to die of old age. The old ancestor of the Shi Kingdom was not much different. Only the Flame God could live forever. Because it was a special life form. There was no tribulation. However, there was no origin source universe. They were the purest divine power cultivators. With advantages, there would be disadvantages. The Flame God didn't have an origin source universe, and its comprehension was poor. The 8th tribulation realm was basically the limit. In terms of battle strength, he could still suppress scattered tribulence. If he really encountered an 8th tribulation universe master, he would basically be trampled on. Universe masters at the 8th tribulation could absorb their universe source into their divine bodies. This was something that only an 8th tribulation expert could do. Basically, he was fighting while bringing along a Tao arena. His strength had almost undergone a qualitative change. This was also the terrifying aspect of an 8th tribulation universe master. Jian Wushuang was different from ordinary universe masters. Even though he was in the 3rd tribulation, he could keep the universe in his body as long as he condensed it. Or rather, it was stored in the starry sky. This was also one of the benefits of the extreme path. The uniqueness of the Eighth Tribulation created a huge faction that possessed the power of an Eighth Tribulation, and a deep foundation. This was also the reason why the Shi Kingdom could become the #1 divine kingdom among the 16 Qingqiao kingdoms. They even suppressed the ancient Wu sect. This was because of the Flame God. Now that Fan Tianfeng did not give the Shi Kingdom face, the Shi Kingdom really had no choice. No one knew what Fan Tianfeng was thinking. The few Seventh Tribulation ancestors of the Shi Kingdom's royal family were a little restless. If the Flame God needed this life force, they would not dare to fight for it. But nobody told them anything beforehand. Now, the Shi Kingdom was already in a dilemma. Jian Wushuang didn't know what Fan Tianfeng was up to. He never expected that Fan Tianfeng would actually help him this time. Fan Tianfeng sat on her throne, her expression unmoved. She did not care about the Shi Kingdom's royal family's opinion at all. She was indeed helping Jian Wushuang this time. It was not because of her relationship with Jian Wushuang. Instead, it was because she felt that this feeling of being high above was very wonderful. Just raising his hand was enough to drive an emperor like Jian Wushuang crazy. 10 million primordial stones. At the same time, he was not afraid of the Shi Kingdom's royal family. TSK, Jian Wushuang, what matters is background, not strength. Fan Tianfeng looked at Jian Wushuang and sneered in her heart. Jian Wushuang nodded excitedly. If he knew what Fan Tianfeng was thinking, he would probably vomit blood. What a mad woman. Although Xiao's expression didn't change, he was disgusted by this method. He was a universe master, the hope of Shi Kingdom, and he didn't rely much on Flame God. Unlike the scattered turbulent experts in the royal family, they were not like Flame God. If Flame God really wanted this life force, the old guys from the royal family would probably give it to him with both hands. Thinking of this, Xiao made up his mind. He had to become a universe master at the 7th Tribulation, or even the 8th Tribulation, to rebuild the glory of the Shi Kingdom. There was no need to rely on a special life form. On the stage, although Feng Jiawu was embarrassed, she was also very dissatisfied with Fan Tianfeng's actions. However, she was a successor of the Flame God. The superiority of a successor of a divine being made her feel that this matter was not too much. What was the Shi Kingdom's royal family? Without the Flame God, the current daughter kingdom would be able to suppress the Shi Kingdom. Not to mention surpassing the ancient Wu sect. The other experts in the hall all had ulterior motives. They were also guessing whether the young master of the Divine Kingdom's malicious bid was a signal for the Flame God to part ways with the Stone Kingdom. Most of them were just watching a joke. The weakening of the Shi Kingdom was good for everyone. Naturally, he enjoyed it. He even wanted to see Fan Tianfeng continue bidding. Jian Wushuang felt that it was enough. He would be satisfied with 10 million. Not only could he buy the 9 Tribulations Tower, but he could also participate in the subsequent auction. He wouldn't even be able to use them all up when he became a universe master. The hall was silent for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. Fan Tianfeng stopped bidding. The finger that contained the power of life fell into Xiao's hand. As for Xiao, he paid 10 million primordial stones. 10 million. Even though they were all primordial stones from the royal family. But Xiao was a member of the royal family. His heart ached a little. He had only prepared 20 million primordial stones for the 7th Tribulation. This time he spent 10 million. He was still a little dissatisfied. Fortunately, Fan Tianfeng did not raise the price again. Otherwise, he would really vomit blood. Xiao had obtained the treasure. Jian Wushuang received 10 million primordial stones. His excitement was not fake. He really didn't expect that this life force could be sold for such a price. This had already exceeded the value of the power of life itself. If one wanted to blame someone, it was Xiao who had to light the sky lantern. He had spent millions of primordial stones for nothing. The auction for the life force had ended. The bidding of the 9 Tribulations Tower continued. This time, Jian Wushuang didn't hesitate. He pretended to be a nouveau riche and directly offered 3 million. Everyone fell silent. Xiao also refrained from making a bid. Compared to the 9 Tribulations Tower, the power of life seemed more tangible. If he bought it and it turned out to be just a decoration, he would incur a huge loss. Now that Jian Wushuang made a bid, many thought he had gone mad. An emperor didn't have much concept of the primordial stone. He made a bid of 3 million without hesitation. Perhaps acquiring the primordial stone had been too easy for him. Jian Wushuang didn't see anything wrong with the price. With his relationship with Master Xianxia, even if it were 30 million, he would still take it. Maybe this 9 Tribulations Tower was no less significant than the Skysite Heavenly Chessboard. The key was the word 9 Tribulations and its 9 layers. It was enough to set people's imaginations ablaze. After winning the bid, Jian Wushuang directly stored it within the origin source universe without even placing it in the mustard seed space. He just couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. He wanted to quickly confirm the resonance transmitted by the Skysite Heavenly Chessboard. But with so many people around, it wasn't easy to explore directly. It wouldn't be too late to study it later once he left. He still had 7 million primordial stones left on hand. Perhaps there would be more suitable treasures for him to contend for in the future. Below the 7 tribulations, hardly anyone could surpass him. Unfortunately, most of the items auctioned next were of no use to him. They were all bought by the universe masters. He couldn't afford to be too ostentatious. Even with a large sum of money, he couldn't buy everything. It would be too wasteful. The primordial stone was of great help to the origin source universe. He could also keep some for himself to stabilize his own universe after stepping into the universe master realm. So, he didn't bid much for the subsequent items. There were a few instances in between where he made bids, lest it seemed he didn't attach importance to the 9 Tribulations Tower. Only a few bids were made, but none of them secured any treasures. Soon the auction was nearing its end. Feng Jiawu also announced the 3 most anticipated treasures of this auction. All 3 items were to be auctioned together. They were categorized as A, B, and C. The final treasures had their own starting prices. The one labeled as A had the highest starting price, a whopping 1 million primordial stones. It's worth noting that in this auction, without the appearance of the Power of Life and the 9 Tribulations Tower, it was difficult to fetch a price exceeding 1 million. And this was just the starting price. The first item, labeled as A, the Tome of Thick Earth. This was an innate origin source treasure. It was the most crucial treasure during the crossing of the 7th Tribulation. Once this treasure was obtained, there was at least a 10% increase in the chances of crossing the 7th Tribulation. It corresponded to the highest tribulation. The 7th Supreme Tribulation, the tribulation of the origin source universe, was governed by the law rule of water. It required the origin source of Earth to deal with. This Tome of Thick Earth was the key treasure. As soon as this treasure appeared, it caused a sensation. Inside the hall, there were several universe masters at the 6th Tribulation, and their backgrounds were extraordinary. The price instantly began to skyrocket. Soon it reached 5 million. Although it was insane, scattered tribulation experts could only watch helplessly. So, they shifted their gaze to the second item. Title: The Auction of Primordial Finger of the Great Wilderness. Auction code: Primordial Finger of the Great Wilderness. It was a secret technique at the peak of the tribulation realm. Starting price: 800,000 primordial stones. It was a pinnacle masterpiece created by a tribulation realm universe master. There was only one opportunity for learning. Once learned, the jade slip containing the technique would shatter. The appearance of this technique caused quite a stir among universe masters of the 5 Tribulations realm. With a starting price of 800,000 primordial stones, even universe masters of the 5 Tribulations realm gritted their teeth and contended for it. For the scattered strong of the tribulation realm, there was a feeling of tears flowing as they watched. Universe masters of the 6th Tribulation realm were busy contending for the Haita legacy. They were not interested in this technique. If they passed their 7th Tribulation and became universe masters of the 7th Tribulation realm, why bother learning someone else's technique? They could create their own. Jian Wushuang was not interested in this technique. He didn't need it himself. His divine power was enhanced by the beast god weapon. In swordsmanship, he had the Starry Sky records waiting for him to create his own peak technique. There was no need for him to learn from others. On the other hand, Sword Immortal Tongha beside him was contending for the Haita legacy. And it seemed that he even pawned his own treasures. The current highest bid had already exceeded 10 million. And it was still rising. A universe master of the 7th Tribulation realm. That was already one of the top-notch experts in the ancient moon spacetime. Whether they were independent cultivators or major powers, they were all vying for it. If an independent cultivator became a universe master of the 7th Tribulation realm, they could establish their own sect. If a major power produced a universe master of the 7th Tribulation realm, they could instantly rise to the top. With a universe master of the 7th Tribulation realm, they could also expand their territory wildly. This would lead to rapid development for families and sections. A force with a universe master of the 7th Tribulation realm was almost invincible. Because within their own domain, a universe master of the 7th Tribulation realm possessed the combat power of an 8th Tribulation realm. As long as they didn't provoke universe masters of the 8th Tribulation realm, they were unbeatable. And in the ancient moon spacetime, universe masters of the 8th Tribulation realm were almost like mythical creatures, rarely seen. Most of them had left ancient moon spacetime. It took quite a bit of luck to provoke an 8th Tribulation expert. Therefore, within ancient moon spacetime, the universe masters of the 7th Tribulation were almost invincible. Thus, facing the tome of thick earth, these universe masters of the 6th Tribulation were all excited, wishing they could risk everything. Several universe masters of the 6th Tribulation even raised their bids to astronomical levels. They staked their entire worth. They could always venture into secret realms and vie for treasures if they lost their treasures. But the Tome of Thick Earth would only appear once in an era. It had to be obtained. Everyone, isn't this a bit too much? Bloodshot streaks flashed in Xianxia's eyes. The current price had exceeded 2 million primordial stones. To the extent that even the second secret technique had been auctioned off. The standoff continued. As soon as Xianxia spoke, a universe master of the 6th Tribulation sneered. What? Isn't the Shi family grand enough to not care about these things? If this weren't an auction, these universe masters of the 6th Tribulation would probably come to blows. This treasure could be auctioned off. The person who obtained it would most likely be a universe master of the 7th Tribulation or a scattered tribulation expert who didn't have any backing. Otherwise, it wouldn't be put up for auction. Any powerful expert with backing would leave it for their descendants. Xianxia knew that this time, things were going to get serious, so he didn't waste any time. He raised his bid as well. But this time, no one gave him face. The price was directly inflated to 50 million primordial stones. In the end, Xianxia, from the royal family of Shi Kingdom, secured the Tome of Thick Earth for 50 million primordial stones. If a universe master of the 6th Tribulation realm were to condense it, it would take 50,000 epochs. There would be consumption in between. There would still be cultivation. And they would need to purchase some precious divine power treasures to enhance their divine power. Storing 50 million primordial stones was extremely difficult. 50 million was an astronomical figure even for a universe master of the 7th Tribulation. Xianxia, who was already at the peak of the 6th Tribulation realm, indeed needed this treasure. If he could successfully cross the tribulation, Shi Kingdom would have a universe master of the 7th Tribulation realm. There would be no need to rely on the flame god anymore. Moreover, the value of a universe master in the 7th Tribulation was far more than just 50 million primordial stones. Aside from the enhancement in combat prowess, there was also the opportunity to break through to the 8th Tribulation. Undoubtedly, most powerhouses coveted this chance. The scattered tribulation experts were even more envious. That's also why, initially, the top 10 7th Tribulation powerhouses joined forces to besiege Babidi. Wasn't it all for a glimmer of hope? As the auction of the Tome of Thick Earth concluded, this auction itself was also drawing to a close. Now only one treasure remained. Starting bid, 500,000 primordial stones. The postnatal universe treasure. Though not an innate universe treasure, this postnatal universe treasure was crafted using the essence blood of a special life form in the 7th Tribulation. Its value was also considerable. Its upper limit was also in the 8th Tribulation. But its current power was only around the 5th Tribulation. It required 500,000 divine power to activate. It could be considered as a second treasure suitable for universe masters in the fifth tribulation. Apart from the personal ultimate treasure, one could also cultivate some other ultimate treasures. This ultimate treasure was quite good. At least its upper limit was high. Its power was also formidable. Comparatively, it was crafted using the essence blood of a special life form in the seventh tribulation. Of course, it couldn't compare with the beast god weapon. This universe treasure, crafted from the essence of that spikel life form's blood, was merely a fraction of its potential. Jian Wushuang's beast god weapon, however, was empowered by the complete essence of a primordial beast god. In terms of origin, its potential far surpassed that of this universe treasure. Thus, Jian Wushuang remained uninterested in the final treasure. The ancient monastery jade urn. Feng Jiyue announced from the high platform. The universe masters of the sixth tribulation below had no need for it, nor did they find it necessary to cultivate another treasure to enhance their combat prowess. They preferred preparing for the seventh tribulation. However, for universe masters of the fifth tribulation realm, the situation was different. They still had a considerable need for increased power. The crisis of the sixth tribulation was far less daunting than that of the seventh. To enhance their strength, they had to venture out. The ancient monastery jade urn was particularly suitable for universe masters of the fifth tribulation. On the Grand Hall, many powerful beings had already begun to depart. Most of the scattered seventh tribulation masters had left, as well as many universe masters of the sixth tribulation. The struggle for the final treasure was mainly among universe masters of the fifth and fourth tribulation. There wasn't much spectacle to behold. At this moment, Lian Xing also rose to leave. However, before departing, he transmitted to Jian Wushuang, "Kid, this treasure suits you very well. You better acquire it." Jian Wushuang furrowed his brows slightly. Suitable for him? The ancient monastery jade urn. Although it was crafted from very unique materials and classified as a universe treasure, it might not necessarily suit him, an emperor. The main function of this urn was to store one's own divine power and release it internally during battles with strong opponents, without depleting one's own divine power. It was a single-use treasure that could be reused. However, the stored divine power was limited, requiring replenishment after each use. Standard cultivators naturally find replenishing their divine power quite fulfilling. However, Jian Wushuang wasn't your average individual. This line of thought suited him quite well. However, the current bidding had already surpassed 1 million. Jian Wushuang wasn't keen on squandering such a large sum of primordial stones on what could be considered a trivial purchase. If this ancient monastery jade urn could store origin source, he would definitely acquire it. His aim was at the origin source, not divine power. In the future, he probably wouldn't lean too heavily towards divine power. Therefore, he wasn't inclined to divert his attention towards nurturing this treasure. With the beast god weapon and the general armor, most of his treasures were invaluable in terms of divine power. There was no need to purchase this jade pot. However, he didn't immediately refute Lian Xing. Instead, he inquired through voice transmission, "Senior, what special features does this jade urn have?" Jian Wushuang wasn't foolish. If Lian Xing claimed it had significant uses, he might as well let him explain what those were before making a decision. If persuaded, he would buy it. If not, he wouldn't lose anything. It was practically a win-win situation. For others, Lian Xing wouldn't spare much effort. Upon hearing Jian Wushuang's doubts, Lian Xing didn't conceal anything and revealed his insights. There was another unique aspect of this ancient monastery jade urn that Feng Jiyu didn't mention, because mentioning it was equivalent to not mentioning it at all. That was the connection between the power of the jade pot and the origin source. In reality, the strongest origin source resided within this ancient monastery jade urn. The stronger the origin source, the more astonishing the stored divine power. Lian Xing was aware that Jian Wushuang's origin source far surpassed that of ordinary individuals. Hence, the recommendation. The ancient moon spacetime was predominantly a realm of divine power. Therefore, Feng Jiyu didn't elaborate much on the origin source. Explaining it to these people would be of little use. because it wasn't crucial. However, this aspect was much more significant for Jian Wushuang. It also gave him a reason to take action. 1.8 million. Jian Wushuang slowly raised his hand, stating his price. Instantly, a solemn expression fell upon the faces of the strong within the hall. A fifth tribulation universe master from the Sure Kingdom rose directly, his voice filled with anger. Jian Wushuang, you, a mere emperor, think you can contend with us just because you have primordial stones? Be careful not to lose your life. This universe master of the fifth tribulation was also a disciple of Stone Xiu, a core member of the royal family, naturally aware of Jian Wushuang's dealings with Shi Jiu. Moreover, having previously refrained from retaliating against Fan Tianfeng's malicious bidding and seizing the opportunity to teach him a lesson. But now, facing Jian Wushuang, this universe master of the fifth tribulation found him truly formidable. Engaging in combat with him would undoubtedly be a mismatch. However, it was impossible for the other party to oppress him solely based on strength. He stood up as well, casting a sideways glance and weighing the mustard seed in his hand, saying, Dao friend, if you find my offer problematic, feel free to continue bidding. Why bother having a conflict with me? Or perhaps you can't produce 1.8 million primordial stones. A mere emperor dares to speak arrogantly. If it weren't for your stroke of luck, obtaining the power of life, where would you get so many primordial stones? Jian Wushuang sneered coldly, sitting back on his chair, casually remarking, Don't forget, that power of life was bought by your royal family. If you're unwilling, you can return it. This statement caused the face of the universe master of the fifth tribulation to flush red. Indeed, the power of life had been purchased by the royal family, and now it might even be in the hands of several venerable ancestors. Such pure power of life might even be offered to the first ancestor within the royal family, an eighth tribulation realm powerhouse. However, Jian Wushuang knew best about the power of life. He had condensed himself. That power of life could greatly assist universe masters of the seven tribulation. But it was utterly useless for those of the eight tribulation. It was like a drop in the ocean, of no significant use. In the past, the Tao Lord could help those of the sixth tribulation. Now, the Emperor assisted those of the seven tribulation. When he reached the universe master, perhaps he could gather the life force to restore the strength of the eight tribulation experts. This power was much more terrifying than what he possessed now. The universe master from Sure Kingdom, a fifth tribulation expert, realized that there was no point in wasting words to intimidate Jian Wushuang. He simply turned and left. The treasures he used, he had to buy them himself. At this moment, relying on the family was unreliable. If everyone depended on the family to cover for them, it would have collapsed long ago. Only the top figures within the family would mobilize the entire clan for cultivation. Not everyone was like Fan Tianfeng. Jian Wushuang was curious about what aspect of Fan Tianfeng had caught the attention of the flame god. She was treated like this. It had only been a little over 10,000 years since entering the ancient moon spacetime, yet in this short time span, the flame god had established such a status for Fan Tianfeng. This woman was extraordinary. For 1.8 million primordial stones, he acquired the ancient monastery jade urn. With the auction officially over, Jian Wushuang nodded to Fan Tianfeng before leaving. He didn't speak, but there was gratitude in his gesture. If there was a chance, he would see Fan Tianfeng again before leaving Sure Kingdom and try to share as much information as he could. He couldn't watch her walk into death. From ancient moon spacetime to Qishan Temple. He didn't know how many epochs or how many spacetimes he needed to cross. During this period, Fan Tianfeng could become a universe master. Even with several seven tribulation realm experts and the flame god's avatar, he felt there was no possibility of defeating Mieshang. Mieshang seemed to be his fate. Apart from him, no one could defeat him. Leaving the auction hall and ascending the stone steps, Jian Wushuang appeared in a certain courtyard in the southern city. To his surprise, Lian Xing was waiting for him. It seems you've acquired the ancient monastery. Lian Xing nodded approvingly. Jian Wushuang hurriedly expressed his gratitude. Many thanks for your guidance, senior. Obtaining this treasure is entirely thanks to your discerning eye. Flattery costs nothing. At this moment, it would be remiss not to butter him up a bit. Lianxing waved his hand casually, saying, "It's a trivial matter. Come with me. The materials are ready, and we can start refining the divine tier sword blank." Jian Wushuang nodded in agreement. The two departed together. This time, they directly entered the core of the 9th level, the purgatory world. The temperature here was so high it could melt the universe. Jian Wushuang could only withstand it by erupting with 500,000 units of divine power through the divine beast armor. The flow rate here is very slow. 1 year outside is equivalent to 10,000 years here. Lianxing continued. To refine the divine tier sword blank, I'll need 30,000 years. Can you endure it? This is just the beginning. Jian Wushuang's resolute gaze remained unchanged. He could endure hardship, even at 1,000-fold speed. I hadn't noticed. It meant that the spatial stability here was exceptionally strong. It had merged with time, rather than the simple formations he had set up. Although the flow rate was high, it wasn't stable. To refine artifacts here, one must ensure the stability of space. Lianxing had paid a considerable price for this. This time, Jian Wushuang was in a hurry to refine the sword blank here. Let's begin. Lianxing manipulated the flames, starting to merge the materials. This step was the simplest. The materials didn't just melt into liquid like ordinary substances. It was Jian Wushuang's first time witnessing such a superb technique. He was quite astonished. All the materials ultimately transformed into primordial spiritual energy, floating in the sky. It was intangible. Lianxing also began to focus intently, muttering, "Gather!" The aura twisted and began to continuously contract inward. From this alone, Jian Wushuang could discern the mysteries within the space, vividly manifested. The inwardly contracting aura was continuously suppressed. The pressure of the aura began to shatter the space. The strength of the power exceeded ordinary imagination. A divine tier sword blank. How could it be so simple? Some of the subsequent techniques made Jian Wushuang gasp in astonishment. Originally, he thought he might become a genius in refining if he persevered. But now it seemed he wouldn't have that opportunity. For the past 10,000 years, he had been mostly watching. For millennia, Lianxing repeatedly compressed and restrained the aura. Finally, it formed a crimson gas. It already had the shape of a sword. Jian Wushuang, catch it. Within 10,000 years, do not let your mental strength dissipate, or else all previous efforts will be wasted. With a flick of his finger, Lianxing sent the red sword shadow towards Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's figure remained still, but his mental force surged out of his body. Using his mental force, he condensed a pair of enormous palms, grasping the sword chi. Buzz! Jian Wushuang instantly sensed that his thought power force was rapidly depleting. So, this is the test of will? Seemed a bit childish. Ah! Ha! With a sudden burst, Jian Wushuang directly unleashed the eternal ancient transformation. In this place, divine power was necessary to withstand the temperature contained within the flames. Mental force also depended on the strength of the origin. The power of the blue starry sky surrounded him, propelled Jian Wushuang to the peak state. Mental force strengthened once again. Lianxing's eyes flickered as he murmured, "Is this your confidence?" He believed in Jian Wushuang, in that unstoppable self-assurance. With absolute confidence and strength at the same level, he was the absolute future powerhouse. Endure it. As long as your thought power withstands the test of 10,000 years, you'll be halfway to success. Lianxing reminded from the side. Jian Wushuang remained silent, simply gripping onto that sword chi. His stubborn expression even earned admiration from Lianxing. It required immense perseverance and willpower. The bitterness of it all, only Jian Wushuang knew, which was why Lianxing had initially tried to persuade him. Not everyone could endure this kind of torment. 8 tribulation powerhouses naturally wouldn't mind. But Jian Wushuang was just an emperor. Why would an emperor go to such lengths? No one knew, Perhaps some wouldn't understand why the fate of an entire spacetime fell upon an emperor. Such a tragedy. But Jian Wushuang never lost confidence because of it, nor did he ever complain, even when Jinling used him as bait. He turned this unjust fate into his own tribulation, using his strength superior to his peers to mask the responsibilities he shouldn't have borne. 10,000 years. In the blink of an eye, under the cleansing of mental force, the sword qi had already merged with him. The effect had been achieved. Lian Xing wasted no time. He took the sword qi from Jian Wushuang's hand and then drew out an ordinary divine sword with its scabbard. It appeared ordinary, but this divine sword was forged with the hardest space-time crystals. Those below the seventh tribulation couldn't destroy it. Of course, it wasn't invincible. Couldn't destroy the sword itself, but it could disrupt the origin source within. And the origin source within was the sword qi that Jian Wushuang had cleansed for 10,000 years. The sword qi entered the scabbard, and its power erupted. However, while the sword qi merged with Jian Wushuang, it didn't merge with the divine sword. This required Lian Xing's methods. By fusing the two together, could be successful by 70%. The rest depended on how Jian Wushuang would recognize its ownership. At that time, Jian Wushuang would need to suppress the divine sword with his own origin source. The time needed for Lian Xing was very short. After several years, Jian Wushuang successfully merged the divine sword with sword qi. It was like infusing an ordinary divine sword with an origin source. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. The divine tier sword blank was immediately successful. This divine sword would accompany him throughout his life. A hum resounded once again. A bloody hue descended from the sky. The sword blank has formed. The rest is up to you to refine. Lian Xing showed a hint of fatigue. He had never been so tired refining divine tier blanks before. This time was indeed somewhat special. Jian Wushuang's purified sword qi seemed inexplicably powerful, almost causing a mishap. This also aroused his curiosity about Jian Wushuang's origin source. How had he cultivated to possess such a formidable origin source? He had heard that the cultivation methods from other spacetimes differed from those in ancient moon spacetime. He faintly speculated that Jian Wushuang might have obtained techniques from another spacetime, but he hadn't expected Jian Wushuang to come from such a distant spacetime river. When the pressure fell on Jian Wushuang once again, this time, he had to catch the divine sword with his own hands because this divine sword had a physical form now. As he grasped the divine sword, his Tao heart began to tremble. A powerful force directly impacted the depths of his soul. Jian Wushuang's brow furrowed slightly, but he still held on firmly. It was the final step of refining the divine tier sword blank, infusing it with his own origin source, suppressing the origin source of the divine sword, a process akin to acknowledging ownership. However, countless individuals had stumbled at this step. Simultaneously, there were benefits. The stronger one's origin source, the more potent the origin source of the divine sword would become. Jian Wushuang held the divine sword while infusing his own origin source into it. In an instant, the origin source of the starry sky poured in, and Jian Wushuang's mind became clear and bright. A huge starry sky map unfolded. In the starry sky, a divine sword transformed into 9 blades. 5 of them formed the river of time. The remaining 4 were embedded in the starry sky. Unexpectedly, my starry sky chronicles resonates. Jian Wushuang didn't expect such a pleasant surprise. The pinnacle secret techniques he had been continuously creating were now taking shape in an instant. The current state of the sword was not like him entering the origin source of the divine sword, but rather the sword entering his own starry sky origin source. Standing at the peak of the starry sky, for sword shadows were embedded in it. He couldn't move, but he could sketch the 5 divine swords in the river of time below. These 5 sword shadows were continuously devouring his starry sky origin source. Unfortunately, absorbing those origin source was like a drop in the bucket to him, trivial and insignificant. Originally thought to be more difficult, now it seemed easier than brushing off dust with telekinesis. It was simply not challenging for him. Al could even take advantage of this opportunity to create his own starry sky chart. Originally, a starry sky chart was just a drawing. Now he had to depict the first sword. Life, the origin source of all things condensed. Jian Wushuang delved into enlightenment. He began to contemplate deeply. This sword, like when he first created the Starry Sky Chronicles, wasn't meant for killing enemies. It was for all living things, just embedded in the starry sky, not truly falling. Although his Starry Sky Chronicles made him unbeatable with a sword, it had never truly tasted blood. It only froze the strong in the painting and was later slain by other means. Life was the origin source of this sword. With his previous accumulation, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and silently recited, "The first sword, it is life, and it is also a new beginning." The first sword move was complete. He began to comprehend the second sword move. Now, he could at least comprehend 5 strands of sword chi. In the Starry Sky Chronicles, he sketched out 5 sword moves. The first sword, life. And for the second sword, let's call it death. Jian Wushuang finished speaking, and a black mist appeared at his brow, as if Mieshang had possessed him. Suddenly, he gained a whole new understanding of the power of death. This was also thanks to his second nascent soul in the Qixin Temple. Although it was far away and the second nascent soul had been in seclusion, unable to extricate itself, some of its mysteries had been absorbed into his main body, and thus the second sword move was formed. Death, life, the two conflicted with each other, seemingly incompatible like water and fire, yet they complemented each other. Moreover, the power generated by their opposition was at least hundreds of times stronger than either sword move alone. The power of the first and second sword moves was actually the same. It's just that they had different functions. The first sword move, life, excelled at binding strong enemies. The second sword move, death, excelled at killing enemies. After becoming familiar with the principles contained within the first 2 sword moves, Jian Wushuang began to depict the third sword move, Reincarnation. I create life, but I also journey with death. The mark on his brow began to change, eventually condensing into 2 identical fish. Black and white, yin and yang slaughter. The Reincarnation sword, complete, although it had been created. Using it was another matter altogether. Because the burden was too heavy, he could barely execute the first sword move. The second sword move was out of reach. Even if their powers were equal, he couldn't manifest it, unless he reached the level of Universe Master, and possessed the origin source of the universe. As for the third sword move, according to his estimation, the origin needed to reach the power of 10,000 black holes to be executed. Right now, his origin source couldn't even support reincarnation, couldn't even support death. He could only create more power within the perfect formation of the universe. But now, his desire surged uncontrollably, flooding his mind, continuously perfecting his Starry Sky Chronicles. This feeling was wonderful. Unconsciously, he created such a pinnacle secret technique. The first sword born from life. The second sword travels with death. The third sword unites yin and yang, sending ants into reincarnation. Jian Wushuang was very satisfied, looking at his Starry Sky Chronicles. Once again, he wielded his sword and muttered to himself, "Space-time." The path of his origin followed the orthodox way of space-time, although he had condensed the starry sky. But before achieving the starry sky, he had to at least reach the stage of mastering space-time. This was unavoidable. The fourth sword move formed instantly. Countless fragments, sword shadows, growth, sword Dao, memories. All scenes kept retreating. Jian Wushuang seemed to traverse his own timeline, finally returning to reality. Space-time, complete. The 5 sword moves in the Starry Sky Chronicles. He comprehended 4 of them. Only the last one was missing. From the beginning he had a goal. The last sword move must be the cycle of space-time. This was also laid out from the foundation of life. 9 sword chis entered the starry sky. For sword chis were embedded in the starry sky, which he couldn't comprehend. Only when he reached a higher realm could he comprehend them. Now, the 5 sword chis depicted in the Starry Sky records were enough for him to roam freely within the Universe Master. The first sword move, life, he could already execute when he was emperor. Previously, without a clear goal, its power was enough to slay a third tribulation expert. Now that he had comprehended it completely, his power had skyrocketed. With the Emperor's origin source, he might be able to kill a fourth tribulation expert. It's worth noting that previously, his strength relied solely on the Beast God weapon and the eternal ancient transformation. He had forgotten about the strongest, Sword Dao. Now he reorganized the Sword Dao, creating the complete Starry Sky 5 swords. His combat power soared directly, which was expected. If it weren't for the change in his divine power due to the blood-colored power, his combat power would probably still be in Sword Dao. But this change became normal after he became the Universe Master. Eli's basic divine power of 400,000 was nothing among the Universe Masters. Even the scattered Tribulation Realm experts had a basic divine power of 400,000. In the future, he would still rely on Sword Dao. The Extreme Dao condensed all things into one, which was the origin source of Sword Dao. Jian Wushuang's innate Dao was also Sword Dao, and only with the trump card of Sword Dao could he feel at ease. With the 5 sword moves formed, he would become invincible at the Universe Master level. Just as he condensed his 5th sword intent, the entire origin source began to tremble. Even the starry sky was shaking. Jian Wushuang was startled. Al quickly retreated, but upon second thought, this was his own origin source starry sky. Where could he retreat to? He immediately began to use his thought power to investigate his own origin source, trying to see where the problem was. Only after he delved deeper did he realize. The 4 strands of sword chi embedded in the starry sky were actually continuously devouring his own origin source starry sky. The sword chi changed from dark red to light blue, looking back at the universe about to be illuminated. In the Universe Starry Sky Chronicles, the 5 sword moves he comprehended and created had also turned blue. They were devouring his starry sky power. The origin sword blank also evolved into the origin source of the starry sky. At this moment outside, Lian Xing was staring incredulously at Jian Wushuang. He found that the divine tier sword blank he had just refined was undergoing a transformation. It seemed that, because of Jian Wushuang's origin, some kind of advancement had occurred. The legends are true. Treasures above divine tier can indeed be created. Lian Xing's mouth widened in amazement. He hadn't expected that his one act of kindness could actually refine the peak of his life. At this moment, everything was worth it. The pinnacle of a divine forge master. Though it lasted but an instant, it was all because of Jian Wushuang's fundamental issue. Yet it was enough. In the end, it could be said that this divine sword was forged by him. After his astonishment, Lian Xing began to ponder, eventually shaking his head and muttering to himself, "Regardless of your future accomplishments, today we have forged a karmic bond." Now, when he looked at Jian Wushuang, there seemed to be no limit, because it had already surpassed his understanding. In any aspect, he couldn't fathom the depths of Jian Wushuang. That's why he felt there was no limit to Jian Wushuang's achievements. Anyway, the karmic bond was established. The stronger Jian Wushuang became, the better it was. This way, he could also bask in the glory. It would also save face when spoken of. Within the starry sky, the origin source still trembled. The 9 strands of sword chi continued to devour. For strands of sword chi were embedded in the starry sky, devouring even more fiercely. Jian Wushuang was almost going mad. The origin source of the starry sky was the grand vision he had painted for the future. There could be no mistakes. He could only steel himself and break into the vast expanse of the starry sky. Standing beneath the magnificent 4 strands of sword chi, he felt incredibly insignificant. If the first 5 sword moves could make him roam as the Universe Master, then these 4 further sword moves had already surpassed the Universe Master. Jian Wushuang looked at the 6th strand of sword chi, observing it carefully from top to bottom, before murmuring to himself, "With this sword technique, even the ancient times can be challenged. If one day he could unleash the 6th sword move, he would dare to battle the 3 ancient beings of the 9 great spacetimes." This wasn't arrogance, but confidence. The 6th sword move was too powerful. As for the 3 sword chis behind it, he couldn't even comprehend them. Or perhaps it was more accurate to say he couldn't quite understand them, and they kept growing stronger. Devouring vast amounts of starry sky power, Jian Wushuang felt a sense of unease creeping into his heart. It was as if a mischievous child worried about being caught by an adult. The more he thought about it, the more Jian Wushuang felt as if there was a giant eye staring at him from the depths of the starry sky. Buzz. Perhaps it wasn't just his imagination. Jian Wushuang gazed into the depths of the starry sky, and at the same time, the depths of the starry sky seemed to gaze back at him. In the outer realms of time and space, within the origin source, amid the stars, a giant eye opened within the starry sky, peering towards the river of time flowing towards its end. With just one glance, it pierced through space and time. After seeing Jian Wushuang, the eye closed again. As this giant eye closed, Jian Wushuang's oppressive feeling from before dissipated within the origin source, and he breathed a sigh of relief. Al noticed that the origin source was no longer trembling. It had returned to calmness. The four sword chis had turned deep blue. It seemed they had absorbed enough. Thank goodness! Jian Wushuang wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Returning to his illuminated universe, a blue divine sword floated before him. With its blue scabbard and icy blue blade, a surge of killing intent washed over him. A peerless weapon of great slaughter. Jian Wushuang sheathed the sword. As the divine sword returned to its scabbard, it stirred a roar akin to a dragon's cry. Examining the patterns on the scabbard once more, Jian Wushuang frowned. Originally, there were only some simple patterns on the scabbard. But now there was an extra eye, a rather terrifying one. The eye was large and lifelike. Within its pupil, there was a figure standing on a towering mountain. Facing away from him, their features were indiscernible. Could it be formed from the power of the starry sky? Jian Wushuang puzzled over it, but he had no way to verify it. Perhaps even Lian Xing wouldn't know. Al could only set aside this thought. The sword was complete. This trip to the Sure Kingdom had been fruitful. Swoosh! Gripping the sword sheath with one hand, Jian Wushuang departed from his own origin source starry sky. Seeing Jian Wushuang's return to consciousness, Lian Xing understood that Jian Wushuang had succeeded. This time there were no surprises. Jian Wushuang faced the other party with a calm expression, thinking that this trial wasn't as difficult as anticipated. He spoke, "Senior, the divine sword is complete. Not bad, not bad. Let me see how this sword blank turned out." Lian Xing reached out to take the divine sword. However, when he tried to draw the sword, he felt a chill in his heart as he realized he couldn't activate the divine sword. For a moment, he felt a bit embarrassed and shocked. It was even more formidable than he had expected. Al couldn't even draw it out himself. Most likely, only the master of the divine sword could do so. But in front of a junior, failing to draw out even the sword blank he had crafted was truly unacceptable. He quickly came up with an excuse for himself and instructed Jian Wushuang. "This is your destined treasure. You must be the one to draw the sword. It's a rule. Even though I crafted it, I cannot draw it out." With that, he handed the hilt to Jian Wushuang, indicating for him to draw it out and have a look. Jian Wushuang actually believed it and quickly said politely, "This sword is crafted by Senior's hands. There's no need for such formality, Senior." But seeing the other party insist repeatedly, he genuinely began to respect Lian Xing from the bottom of his heart. Truly deserving of being the #1 divine forge master in the ancient Wood continent. Not only was his craftsmanship unparalleled, but his demeanor was probably enough to overshadow a large group of 7th Tribulation experts. Thinking about those 7th Tribulation powerhouses who had joined forces with Babidi, and then looking at Lian Xing, the difference was like night and day. Clang! The divine sword was unsheathed, its icy blue blade sending chills down one's spine. "Please, Senior." After Jian Wushuang drew the divine sword, he held the hilt with one hand, pointing the sword tip downward and offering it to Lian Xing. Lian Xing looked at the surface of the divine sword, feeling a surge of saliva in his mouth. His face filled with an even wider smile. This is a masterpiece. How could he not be excited? His palms even sweated a little. To avoid dirtying the hilt, he rubbed his hands against his clothes. This small detail was noted by Jian Wushuang, who thought to himself, "Attentive person," but in the next moment, as he handed the sword hilt to Lianxing and let go, Lianxing dropped to the ground from mid-air at the fastest speed. The ice-blue divine sword floated above the flames. No matter how hard Lianxing tried, he couldn't pick up the divine sword. Jian Wushuang was startled too and quickly descended, coming to Lianxing's side, and asked with concern, "Senior, are you okay?" Cough, cough. Lianxing quickly let go, then turned around, hiding Jian Wushuang from view, coughed twice into his fist and said, "It's nothing, just didn't expect this sword to be quite special. You should put it away quickly." Jian Wushuang also felt there was something wrong with the divine sword. When it was in its sheath, Lianxing could easily pick it up, but after pulling it out and handing it to Lianxing, he couldn't lift it. He casually picked up the hilt, forming a conjecture in his mind. It must be because of the hilt. It only recognizes the power of the starry sky, so outsiders can't pull it out. With this in mind, when Lianxing held the hilt just now and was asked to pull out the sword, it was probably just a trick played on him. Thinking of this, Jian Wushuang couldn't help but smile wryly. After sheathing the divine sword, he carried it behind his back. The sword Dao of the starry sky comes from Nie Yuan's sword Dao. Al had once mocked the other party for carrying a broken sword, but now he had inherited this aspect of Nie Yuan. Carrying the divine sword, the sword never leaves his side. In order to dispel the recent awkwardness, Jian Wushuang earnestly said, "Senior Lianxing, this sword has yet to be named. I, being of limited talent, would appreciate it if Senior could bestow a name upon it. Since you are so sincere, then I will make an exception and suggest one for you." Lianxing was quite pleased. He hadn't expected Jian Wushuang to ask him for a name. If it were someone else, perhaps he wouldn't have felt this way. But this treasure he had just forged was extraordinary, especially after witnessing the chilling divine weapon with its icy blue blade. It was definitely surpassing any previous divine treasures he had crafted. Naming such a treasure was also his honor. So Lianxing pondered carefully for a moment. Then his eyes lit up as he thought of a name. A sword of myriad tribulations, Wanjia. It symbolized enduring through myriad calamities. "Let's call it the Wanjic sword," Lianxing announced. Jian Wushuang silently repeated to himself, "Wanjia sword." Back when he was at the Dao Lord realm, there was a sword technique known as Wanjia. However, at that time, he didn't understand the concept of the Tribulation realm. Now, hearing this name, it sounded quite fitting for him after becoming the Universe Master. "Thank you, Senior, for the name." Jian Wushuang was quite satisfied. Originally, he didn't think names were very important, so he didn't pay much attention to them. Lianxing smiled faintly. "Well, now that the divine weapon is complete, I won't keep you any longer. I believe we'll meet again soon. Farewell." The sacred assembly was approaching. Knowing that Jian Wushuang was going to participate, Lianxing didn't try to detain him. He had just obtained the sword blank. Al still needed to familiarize himself with it and create his own sword techniques. He didn't know yet that Jian Wushuang had already created the perfect cosmic secret technique. It's just that his current strength was weak, so he couldn't display it. Jian Wushuang also understood that Lianxing had his best interests at heart, even though he had already created the pinnacle technique of swordsmanship. However, he couldn't give up on the super-eternal ancient transformation technique. He had to perfect it as much as possible so that he could directly unleash it after becoming the Universe Master. Moreover, he still had two treasures on him that he hadn't researched yet: the 9 Tribulations Tower and the ancient monastery. Now, there was only a year or two left until the sacred assembly. He also needed to go to the ancient Wood sect in advance. This left Jian Wushuang with less than a year of time. He needed time to comprehend, requiring the flow of time to speed up. Otherwise, time would truly not be enough. He bid farewell to Lianxing. Al had originally planned to meet with Fan Tianfeng again and have a detailed discussion. Even if it was just for a day, it would have been enough. But when he tried to contact Fan Tianfeng, he found out that she had already closed herself off to break through into the Tribulation realm. She wouldn't be able to come out in a short time. Al could only use the token given to him by Jinling to remind Fan Tianfeng. The strength of Mike Xiang was not just superficial. The horror of death was far from simple. Sometimes, being too clear about certain things would only make others disbelieve. It was better to be subtle, at least making the other party think and consider his words so that they would remember them for a long time. If he had taken people with him, it might have ended up benefiting Mieshang even more, pushing their strength further. The top 10 experts of Qishan Temple had originally only had eyes on Hu Qing, but now Jian Wushuang was unwilling to give up on any of them. Maybe their fates weren't that bad after all. They all had means to deal with Mieshang. Take Wu Zhuo for example. Currently trapped in the Wu Hua secret realm, Wu Zhuo caught the attention of a true heavyweight. It wasn't malicious. Among the 10 individuals who entered the ancient moon spacetime, Wu Zhuo was the slowest to advance in strength. His early luck was somewhat inferior to Fan Tianfeng's. But even with lesser luck, opportunities for cultivation were not lacking. It's just that Jian Wushuang's strength increased too rapidly, with each opportunity perfectly timed, causing his strength to soar rapidly. In reality, Wu Zhuo's progress was already quite fast. It's just not as obvious compared to Jian Wushuang. But this time, being targeted by someone significant, his breakthrough period had arrived. Everyone was striving. Hu Qing, in the core area of the ancient moon ruins, also did not give up. There were also Zhen Wuyang, Tongtian Buddha, and the ancient superpowers Dongshang and Wan Yen from the original universe. These people all had significant opportunities. They were all extremely confident about the future. Fan Tianfeng, in particular, was the first to return to the Qishan Temple. Departing from the capital of Shi Kingdom, he did not use the teleportation array. There were no teleportation arrays established between the kingdoms. After all, they were considered hostile relations. Establishing teleportation arrays would just be giving the enemy an opportunity to invade, right? So Jian Wushuang could only fly. Fortunately, his speed was fast enough. He could also teleport through some teleportation arrays between small cities. Returning to Yu Kingdom would only take about a month. Before leaving the Shi Kingdom, he once again came to the fallen Phoenix Valley. Then he directly sneaked underground. He left a national mark before. Following the mark, he quickly reached the previously made opening, descending all the way. But when he arrived at that narrow space, he found it completely empty inside, as if the pink flesh lump didn't exist at all. This shocked him immensely. Could it be it also escaped? Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed. He looked around. Cold sweat ran down his back. Jian Wushuang furrowed his brows, thinking of that monster. They really are from the same kind of group. If it were really like this, his 2 previous pardons would be considered great offenses. It wasn't that he was making a big deal out of it. In truth, both of these monsters were just too extraordinary. He didn't know who their creator was. Since he couldn't find them now, he could only return to Yu Kingdom first. After returning to Yu Kingdom, he first went to the Wu residence and learned from Wu Li about the destruction of his own mansion. After inquiring again, he had already concluded that it was the work of that beetle-like monster. That blood pool, I'm afraid, has already been consumed. Wu Li was just about to discuss the matter of the sacred assembly with him again, but Jian Wushuang hurriedly bid farewell. For him, there was nothing more to discuss. Some things, unless they're right in front of you, no amount of discussion would be useful. Now his strength was strong enough. Wu Li, this ally of his, was also a bit behind. He couldn't be considered a threat, but he wasn't a qualified teammate either. After leaving the Wu residence, he returned to a recovered princess's mansion. Just as he entered the mansion, he saw Elder Mukin. Elder Mukin! He had just entered the mansion, and the other party was about to leave, so they bumped into each other like this. Seeing Jian Wushuang, Elder Mukin smiled and quickly said, "Nephew Wushuang, you've finally returned. The sacred assembly is about to come, and 3 months later we will set off for the ancient Wood sect. It's best not to leave Yu Kingdom during these days. Only 3 months remained." It was indeed somewhat rushed. Fortunately, his Starry Sky Chronicles had already pioneered cosmic secrets. There were only 2 treasures left to explore. Using time acceleration, there was still enough time. After exchanging a few words with Elder Mukin, He sent the latter into the Immortal mansion and watched as he disappeared from view. Jian Wushuang's expression changed. There was some doubt in his heart. When Wuli saw him, he talked a lot about that strange creature. How come Elder Mukin didn't mention a word? This made him feel that the royal family must know something and deliberately suppressed this matter. Thinking of this, he planned to ask his nominal wife, Jinshan. Unfortunately, she was in seclusion. Just now, when Elder Mukin came, he probably got the cold shoulder. Unable to inquire, he didn't persist. Casually summoning a maid, he asked her to lead him back to his room. The reconstruction of the royal mansion was still unfamiliar to him. After twists and turns, the maid led him to a secluded courtyard. Jian Wushuang was quite satisfied with this. The layout of the small courtyard suited his taste so much that he casually threw out tens of thousands of universe crystals, rewarding the maid. Seeing so many universal crystals, the maid quickly bowed and thanked. "Thank you very much, sir. All right, you have nothing else to do, you may leave." Jian Wushuang waved his hand, set up a barrier, and then entered the courtyard. Entering the room in the courtyard, he took out a cave heaven treasure, pupa, which lay on the table as he entered. It seemed as if there was no one in the room, returning to peace. Inside the cave heaven world, small cicada Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged on a patch of green grass, with two treasures laid out in front of him. The 9 Tribulations Tower, the ancient monastery jade urn. The former was connected to the Skysite heavenly chessboard, which he was most looking forward to. The latter's function was not small either. Could reveal another hidden card. Phew! Jian Wushuang took a deep breath, first picking up the ancient monastery jade urn. After playing with it in his hand for a while, his mental force entered the ancient monastery jade urn. In just an hour, he became familiar with the usage of this treasure. Next was refining the ancient monastery jade urn. This might take a long time. He had to slow down time, slower than the normal flow outside by 1,000,000 times. This way it would be easier to maintain, and he could fully focus on cultivation. After doing all this, he used the origin source of the starry sky to refine the ancient monastery jade urn. Although this ancient temple urn was only a postnatal universe treasure, the pressure of refining it was not small. Fortunately, his origin source was strong enough. After spending several years, he successfully refined the ancient monastery jade urn. What remained was storing divine power. If he wanted to store the most powerful divine power, he had to elevate his divine power to its strongest. The power of the beast god. Jian Wushuang placed the jade urn on the ground and stood up. At the moment he stood up, a set of black armor spread out from his flesh, emitting crackling sounds, instantly enveloping his entire body, and then disappearing again into his flesh. Only Jian Wushuang knew that this was the divine body integrating with the armor into his flesh. At this moment, he also had enough confidence. 5 times amplification. Buzz. The power of the beast god crazily twisted at this moment, and a dark red divine power instantly enveloped his whole body. The divine power jumped directly from 400,000 to 600,000. With 4 times the power of the beast god, it could amplify to 600,000. Now with 5 times the power of the beast god. At the very least, it was 650,000 divine power. It had reached the standard of the strength of a universe master in the 5th tribulation. The threshold for scattered tribulation experts in the tribulation realm was 500,000, with the peak reaching 600,000. However, the peak strength of a universe master in the tribulation realm was much greater. Take, for example, Empress Fengqian. Eiler divine power probably exceeded 600,000, it might have even reached 800,000. Because Jian Wushuang had witnessed the wrath of Empress Fengqian, that sense of oppression was much stronger than that of an ordinary scattered tribulation experts. That's also why she had the confidence to contend for the position of the Holy Maiden. After all, she was a peerless genius of the same era as Queen Yunji. Nowadays, Queen Yunji has reached the level of a universe master in the 7th tribulation. With Empress Fengqian being so competitive and strong-willed, how could her strength be lacking? Even though she was still a universe master in the 5th tribulation, her strength was extraordinary, far beyond those of the same level. The eruption of a universe master was not something those scattered tribulation experts could compare to. Currently, Jian Wushuang's strength could easily defeat most scattered tribulation experts in the fifth tribulation. But he didn't have much confidence against a universe master in the fifth tribulation. However, he had obtained this ancient monastery jade urn. If he were to truly confront a universe master in the fifth tribulation, it was hard to say who would emerge victorious. Al exerted all his strength, injecting the divine power within his body into the ancient monastery jade urn. For an ordinary divine power cultivator, it would probably take a very long time. But Jian Wushuang possessed the power of all things. The power of all things not only could transform into life but also was the essence of divine power. With a total of 650,000 divine power in his body, he could inject a maximum of 450,000 at once. Any more than that and it would harm his origin source. After injecting divine power into the ancient monastery jade urn, his divine body instantly felt emptiness. A sense of void almost caused him to collapse. His vision dimmed. He quickly employed the power of all things to rapidly replenish his divine power. Although the nearly infinite power of all things could replenish the massive void, it still took the time of an incense stick burning. This was already quite fast. If it were an ordinary divine power cultivator, even with the use of treasures like the universe crystal and the primordial stone to supplement divine power, it would still take a long time. Once he had fully recovered to his peak, he injected divine power into the urn again. It was still 450,000 divine power. Adding it up, the two injections into the ancient temple pot should have accumulated 900,000 divine power. Unfortunately, divine power wasn't calculated that way. When the basic divine power was 10,000, the treasure needed to increase it to 100,000 divine power was fundamentally different from what was needed to raise it from 100,000 basic divine power to 200,000 divine power. 2 injections of 450,000 divine power. Now, there were only 500,000 divine powers inside the ancient urn. It only increased by 50,000. This was not only due to the stacking of divine power. More importantly, although the ancient monastery jade urn stored divine power and could be injected into it, a lot of divine power also transformed into the origin source of the jade urn, used to maintain its power. Jian Wushuang remained calm about this. At worst, he would inject it a few more times. At most, it would only take a few days. The third time, it increased to 520,000. The fourth time, 530,000. Starting from the fifth time, each time only increased by a few thousand. After 100 times, each injection only contained tens of divine power. Now, there were 700,000 divine powers stored in the ancient temple pot. Further increases would be very difficult. But this was enough. For most universe masters of the fifth tribulation, it would be difficult to withstand 700,000 divine powers. Only someone like Empress Fengqian, with her extraordinary power of the fifth tribulation realm, could withstand it. For dealing with ordinary universe masters of the fifth tribulation, it was sufficient. This was not his only trump card. There was no need to pursue the limit too much. When his basic divine power increased again, he could raise this limit further. If it weren't for his origin source, the ancient monastery jade urn might have only stored its maximum divine power once in the hands of an ordinary divine power practitioner. When facing strong opponents, having an extra maximum attack could double the chance of winning. One mustn't underestimate it. Jian Wushuang carefully sealed the ancient monastery jade urn and stored it within himself. In case of crisis, he only needed to summon the jade urn to release its internal divine power and directly strike down his opponent. It was simple and straightforward. Jian Wushuang quite liked it. There weren't many requirements, which was the best part, unlike the beast god weapon, which, although powerful, had high demands on oneself. As for the sky-sight heavenly chessboard, it was even more so. He hadn't completely mastered it yet. At first, he comprehended the chess pieces on the chessboard, and then he mastered the origin source within the pieces, devouring all the internal origin source. This allowed his own origin source to be better perfected, enabling rapid breakthroughs. Just this alone brought great benefits to Jian Wushuang at the time. After mastering control over the essence, he began to refine it and revive the chess pieces. He could obtain a decent helper. But currently, The combat power of the revived chess pieces couldn't keep up with him. So they were useless. After awakening the general armor later, he began to pay attention to the chessboard again. The general armor not only could guard his divine body from shattering but also could resist divine power attacks, weakening them by 99%. This was the most heaven-defying treasure at present. However, he always felt that the heavenly chessboard had not been developed to its extreme. There must be other uses for it. But his strength was not enough, so it hadn't been triggered. Now the heavenly chessboard resonated with the Nine Tribulations Tower, making him feel that perhaps he could start with the tower to uncover the true function of the SkySight heavenly chessboard. At the same time, he also needed to see if there was any relationship between the Nine Tribulations Tower and teacher Xianxia. If there was a connection, he would hit the jackpot. Dragging the small tower with one hand, Jian Wushuang couldn't feel anything special about it. He began to use his telekinesis to explore the Nine Tribulations Tower. Jian Wushuang frowned, realizing that things seemed different from what he had expected. There was resonance, but when his telekinesis entered the Nine Tribulations Tower, he found that there was nothing inside the small tower. Not even origin source. From its material, it seemed to be a treasure above eternal treasures. But without internal origin source, it lacked power. It was even inferior to eternal treasures. It was just like those rumors after all. Rumors had it that the ancient moon ruins often yielded treasures. Yet those who found these treasures were unable to use them. After passing through several hands, it was ultimately deemed nothing more than a decoration. So, many initially approached this treasure with a sense of hope, hoping to take a chance. If they guessed right, it could be an extraordinary treasure. At the very least, it was a treasure of the innate universe. Perhaps even stronger. However, there were no records of temporal treasures during the ancient moon era. It was probably weaker than temporal treasures. But even so, it was worth the gamble for those strong enough. Because in the past, the ancient moon sect's leader had once inadvertently infiltrated the inner perimeter of the ancient moon ruins and obtained an extraordinary treasure. Pushing through, they reached the peak of the Eighth Tribulation. Unfortunately, they ultimately failed the tribulation, leaving no physical or divine power, simply perishing. That era was brief but extremely glorious. At that time, the leader of the ancient moon sect had waged battles in other spacetimes. They surpassed 9 universe masters who had reached the peak of the Eighth Tribulation and even killed 6 of them. In one fell swoop, they elevated the ancient moon spacetime to an unattainable height. Initially, everyone believed that as long as those ancient eternal beings didn't appear, the leader of the ancient moon sect was invincible. Many also hoped that the leader of the ancient moon sect could successfully pass the tribulation and reach the Ninth Tribulation. Unfortunately, they failed in the end. Time was short. From growth to peak, the leader of the ancient moon sect only lived for 100,000 epochs. This time was brief even for some seventh tribulation beings. Yet, it was the lifetime of a legendary strong individual. Jian Wushuang thought of Hu Qing. Hu Qing was at the ancient moon ruins. But who knew what was happening there now? Why was he warned not to go there in the first place? Was it dangerous? Everyone knew about the dangers of the ancient moon ruins. Even universe masters at the 7th and 8th tribulation could only wander around the outer domain. Just some of the dangers on the outer domain were enough to cause the downfall of the universe master of the tribulation realm. But there were also many treasures. Danger and rewards were equal. There were still many strong individuals who ventured forth to explore. That legendary sect master, who entered the inner circle of the ancient moon ruins when he was weak, had always been a legend. Relying solely on strength seemed impossible to breach. Jian Wushuang felt somewhat disdainful about this. Unable to enter through strength alone? That's just pathetic. Divine power. Confidence that one's strength can surpass myriad laws. Fearless. Unyielding in battle. On this point, he rather admired that Broly. It was a pity that the opponent cultivated the Tao of transformation. If he had followed the path of divine power, he might not have been weaker than the Tao of transformation. The world is ever-changing, just like his current situation. Faced with the treasure emanating from the ancient moon ruins, he was at a loss. But that resonating feeling never disappeared. Jian Wushuang refused to believe it was impossible. This time, he unleashed his origin source to explore. However, after going around in circles, he still couldn't enter the 9th Tribulation Tower. It was then that he thought. Perhaps he needed to take out the Skysight heavenly chessboard. With this in mind, he didn't hesitate. He directly took out the Skysight heavenly chessboard from his origin source. A mist-shrouded chessboard, with a small tower floating above it. After the two overlapped, Jian Wushuang once again used his thought power to explore. But as his thought power touched the 9 Tribulations Tower, a violent aura directly pushed him back. His divine body began to fragment. He suffered some considerable injuries. Despite the injuries, Jian Wushuang smiled. The stronger, the better. This also confirmed his speculation. This 9 Tribulations Tower indeed had some connection with the Skysight heavenly chessboard. And the auras of the two were converging. The converging aura continuously rose, floating in the sky of the cave world. A magnificent bridge appeared. Jian Wushuang looked up at the huge bridge, which emanated a terrifying power. His gaze shifted, and when he looked behind the bridge, Jian Wushuang was stunned. Vaguely, he saw a huge 9-story divine tower towering behind the bridge. This time, he didn't need to use thought power to enter. He could just walk in. After healing his injuries, he cautiously walked towards the 9 Tribulations Tower. All of this seemed like an illusion. The Skysight heavenly chessboard and the 9 Tribulations Tower, on the surface, had already overlapped. The atmosphere was forged by the auras of these two treasures. But Jian Wushuang was willing to explore. Step by step, he crossed the bridge and arrived at the foot of the 9 Tribulations Tower. Looking up, he couldn't see the top of the tower. It soared into the clouds. Indeed extraordinary. Its power is not weaker than the Skysight heavenly chessboard, Jian Wushuang exclaimed in his heart. The ancient moon spacetime had never produced any temporal treasures. Could it be that those artifacts passed down were all temporal treasures? Jian Wushuang unconsciously shook his head. If that were true, then temporal treasures would be like cabbages. This was the river of time, not the depths of the starry sky. If it were said that there were many temporal treasures within the starry sky, he believed it. Since arriving in the ancient moon spacetime, he had come to understand. The so-called 9 great spacetimes were actually upstream spacetimes. Because they were close to the starry sky, their overall strength was much stronger than the midstream and downstream. But in terms of inheritance and treasures, it's not necessarily the case. The inheritance of the Qixin Temple, on the contrary, was more suitable for him. Moreover, there were temporal treasures in the Qixin Temple. Although they were left behind by the shattered higher heavens, they existed after all. Not like the ancient moon spacetime where not a single one had appeared. The 9 Tribulations Tower, it was considered the first one. And it ended up in the hands of Jian Wushuang, an outsider. At the base of the tower, a massive golden gate blocked Jian Wushuang's path. With a single palm thrust, a burst of energy exploded, directly hitting the golden gate. The golden gate opened in response. Everything went smoothly, so smoothly that Jian Wushuang felt a bit uneasy. But he pressed on regardless. Within the 9 Tribulations Tower, a strange aura emanated, almost like it was drawing him in involuntarily. As he stepped inside, Jian Wushuang felt an unprecedented sense of ease. Even his mood improved. That feeling of complete relaxation also boosted his combat power slightly. Clasping his fists, he felt a surge of energy. Everything felt different. He moved his body casually, feeling much more agile. At this moment, he began to observe his surroundings. The interior of the tower was unusually spacious. The colors were dull. In the center, there was a faint white pillar of light. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be natural light filtering in from above. Nothing special about it. For now, it seemed the 9 Tribulations Tower was only peculiar in its environment. It didn't seem to serve any other purpose. But he wasn't in a hurry. It was the same when he obtained the Skysight heavenly chessboard initially. The more powerful the treasure, the harder it was to comprehend. Just as he was thinking this, reality slapped him in the face. Within the white pillar of light, a figure suddenly appeared, startling Jian Wushuang. Seeing the figure, he quickly stepped back. His right hand reacted swiftly, gripping the sword hilt behind him, ready to confront the figure within the light pillar at any moment. "Welcome to the Nine Tribulations Tower." A stiff voice emanated from the figure within the light pillar. The figure became more and more tangible. It allowed Jian Wushuang to see the other's appearance clearly. Wearing a flamboyant mask, hair streaked with gray, and dressed in unusual attire, a style he had never seen before. The Nine Tribulations Tower originated from the ancient moon ruins. Perhaps this figure was one of the earliest practitioners from the ancient moon spacetime. It was normal not to have seen such attire before. Jian Wushuang reassured himself inwardly. The stiff voice gave him the impression that it was more like a puppet. So he didn't beat around the bush, loudly inquiring, "Are you a machine puppet being or a practitioner sealed within the tower?" "Neither," replied the strangely attired masked figure, shaking their head. Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing that the person before him was indeed very much alive. However, their speech was stiff like that of a puppet. "If so, then why are you here?" he pressed. Neither a puppet nor a practitioner, yet still within the Nine Tribulations Tower. Could this person be the true owner of the tower? It was a possibility. Upon hearing this, the masked figure smirked, stepping out of the light beam leisurely, and said nonchalantly, "I'm just waiting for someone here. The person you're waiting for couldn't possibly be me." Jian Wushuang replied, lacking a bit of confidence. He had felt a resonance between the Nine Tribulations Tower and the Skysite Heavenly Chessboard, believing it to be a treasure left by teacher Xianxia. Now it seemed less likely. It could also be that the Skysite Heavenly Chessboard resonated with treasures of the same level, causing him to misunderstand. Regardless, gaining possession of the Nine Tribulations Tower was a win for him. "It is you, but it's also not you," the masked figure spoke cryptically, shrouding their words in mystery. Jian Wushuang cut to the chase. "Can you be more direct?" "I'm waiting for someone to defeat me," the masked figure replied casually, almost making Jian Wushuang burst into laughter. He found it easy to converse with the figure because he could discern that their strength seemed lacking, despite emitting a faint divine aura. Though unsure whether they were human or spirit, there was a faint taste of divine power, albeit weak, around them. It was merely around 200,000 divine power. With a breath, he could extinguish them. "In that case, your wait ends today." Jian Wushuang darted forward, launching a punch directly at the masked figure's face. The force behind this punch was at least 400,000 divine power, matching his base divine strength. Dealing with someone with only 200,000 units of divine power should be simple. Boom! A tremendous explosion shattered the air. Thinking he could easily defeat his opponent, Jian Wushuang was surprised to find the masked figure had vanished. With a thought, Jian Wushuang froze. The figure was now behind him, back turned, hands behind their back, appearing relaxed. Their divine power remained at 200,000, unchanged. "How is this possible?" Jian Wushuang exclaimed in disbelief. "Your divine power seems weak on the surface. How did you evade my attack?" His previous punch not only contained a burst of divine power but also an explosion of speed. Even a universe master couldn't evade such a punch. Yet the figure did. Indeed, things weren't as simple as they seemed. Initially, he thought the Nine Tribulations Tower would be like most treasures, 9 levels, each guarded by a protector, defeating each yielding a treasure. He had encountered such scenarios frequently. Unfortunately, this time he guessed wrong. It was true that the Nine Tribulations Tower had 9 layers. However, the guardians within the tower were somewhat unfathomable in strength. If he relied solely on his strength to evade their attacks, he might have had some idea. But his opponent moved like a ghost. Each attempt to strike again was futile. "Focus!" The voice behind the mask suddenly became stern. As Jian Wushuang attacked again, the opponent once more evaded effortlessly, not only dodging the strike but also delivering a heavy blow to Jian Wushuang's head in return. Jian Wushuang's vision darkened, nearly causing him to black out. Though he wasn't injured, Neither his origin source nor his divine power had changed, but that blow just now left him with an indescribable pain. It felt like an adult punishing a child. Clutching the back of his head, Jian Wushuang looked towards the masked figure, who had already retreated far away, filled with utter fury. It was a disgrace. Ah! His hands clenched into fists, a red aura bursting from within him. Ha! The power of the beast god surged forth. With double the power of the beast god, his divine power soared to 500,000. At that moment he became serious. Without directly attacking, he crossed his arms, and behind him, figures began to emerge. Origin source avatars. Each avatar emitted the same aura, but their strengths varied. However, their differing strengths were indiscernible to others. He refused to believe his opponent could break through this. Here and now he would fight like this. Eventually, one of the avatars would confront the opponent. Although the avatars were significantly weaker in power, dealing with an opponent like the masked figure who possessed 200,000 divine power was still manageable. TSK Tisk, you'd better hope I don't get my hands on you. Jian Wushuang sneered. Several figures began to flicker. Those were afterimages. Meanwhile, his true self had already appeared before the opponent. 74 avatars instantly surrounded the masked figure. They attacked together, while Jian Wushuang's true self watched the opponent's every move. He wanted to see how the other party had dodged. Then he would take the opportunity to strike, avoiding 74 avatars while also keeping an eye on his true self. There was simply no way to avoid it. The space here was very confined. There wasn't enough room for his footwork to maneuver. But the next moment he was dumbfounded. Almost every time the avatars attacked, it was flawless. But the masked figure used a movement technique he couldn't comprehend, swiftly dodging. None of the avatars could even touch the opponent. And from a distance, he felt as if the space had shrunk to inches. It seemed like the area had widened. His tactic of overwhelming with sheer numbers was no longer effective. He could only rely on his true self to strike. 500,000 units of divine power, this was the threshold of the fifth tribulation. Combined with the ambush, he refused to believe it, gathering energy in his hands, condensing it into a sphere, directly throwing it out, using the burst of energy to cover his own approach, quickly closing in behind the opponent. He thrust out with a knife hand, clearly hitting, but Jian Wushuang couldn't help but feel helpless. Swish! The figure struck in front of him flickered for a moment and then disappeared. It was an afterimage left by the movement technique. Even if his eyesight was poor, his hands could feel it, striking the air. Not bad. To be able to keep up with my afterimage so quickly. You still have tricks up your sleeve, use them all. The masked figure, hands behind his back, yawned. Jian Wushuang, upon hearing this, grew even more infuriated, especially seeing the casual demeanor. Clearly, he was being looked down upon. When had he ever endured such indignation? And yet, the opponent's strength was clearly much weaker than his. If you're brave, stop dodging. Jian Wushuang was clearly somewhat disheartened. As soon as he spoke, he regretted it. Once again, in an unbelievable manner, the masked figure appeared in front of him. Jian Wushuang threw a punch, hitting nothing but air. Before he could attack again, he felt a twisting sensation in his abdomen, causing his entire body to convulse. This time, the masked figure had truly struck. Not only did he strike, but he also returned a punch, hitting Jian Wushuang in the abdomen. The pain caused cold sweat to form on Jian Wushuang's forehead. Ridiculous. But he refused to believe it. 500,000 divine power wasn't enough. Then make it 600,000. He had never lost to the same level before, especially since the opponent's power wasn't on the same level as his. How could he lose to them? A being neither human nor ghost. The power of the beast god, quadrupled, directly increased his divine power by 200,000. His entire body's divine power reached 600,000. This could be considered a small peak for him. Once again he made a move, but it was dodged again. However, this time, he didn't use his doppelganger. Nor did he ambush. He struck the opponent's afterimage. The masked figure showed some differences and exclaimed, "You actually still hide your strength. What other cards do you have? Use them quickly. Your time is running out." Time is running out? Jian Wushuang frowned. He didn't want to engage in meaningless attacks anymore. The power of the beast god disappeared in an instant. What did the opponent mean by saying time was running out? Could it be that, if he couldn't defeat the opponent, he would be stuck here forever? "Yes, I'll only give you half an hour. If you can't defeat me, you'll need to wait for a year before coming back. Time here flows at a normal rate, so your time acceleration won't work." The masked figure also took the time to explain the time flow. Jian Wushuang breathed a sigh of relief. A chance to challenge once a year. But in just 1 year, how could he make any progress? Even if he could accelerate time outside, he couldn't improve much. Moreover, in a year, it would already be the sacred assembly. He wouldn't have time to come back to this 9 tribulation tower. The opponent was so mysterious, especially their dodging technique. If he could learn it, then he would be invincible. By then, even the universe master at the 6th tribulation wouldn't scare him. He wondered what benefits defeating the opponent would bring. Of course, it would be best if the opponent taught him that move. He took the opportunity to inquire, "You haven't said? What's the benefit of defeating you? Otherwise, wouldn't I have worked in vain?" "You're right, defeating me is indeed futile. As for the benefit, it's the achievement you gain at the moment of defeating me," the masked figure replied calmly. Jian Wushuang almost spat blood. What did it mean to gain achievement at the moment of defeating him? Could it be that the opponent was the strongest in spacetime, and defeating him would make oneself invincible? Too ridiculous. If you don't believe it, you're welcome to try. The masked individual was confident in themselves. Jian Wushuang coldly declared, "Then I will try." Finishing his words, his aura suddenly turned blue. Eternal ancient transformation. The blue Jian Wushuang might not have the formidable 600,000 divine power, as he was still an emperor and his origin source hadn't undergone significant changes, nor had his enhancements been as exaggerated as the divine power. Even when he reached the level of universe master, his essence remained the strongest. However, there was a certain confidence within him that made him feel more assured in his blue form. Crucially, by employing the eternal ancient transformation, he could enhance his sword Dao, enabling him to execute the Starry Sky Chronicles. He refused to believe that the opponent could evade his Starry Sky Chronicles. The Sword of Life was unavoidable, unless the opponent wasn't alive. But that seemed quite possible. No matter how he looked at the opponent, they didn't seem human. "The power of the Starry Sky?" the masked figure remarked. "That's somewhat interesting." Jian Wushuang was surprised, his mouth agape, and he said in astonishment, "You even know about the power of the Starry Sky?" Knowledge of the power of the Starry Sky was scarce in the river of time. The only instance he had witnessed it was when Nie Yuan had utilized the power of the Starry Sky. It was a power belonging to the Starry Sky. The fact that the opponent even knew about this surprised him. Upon careful consideration, it wasn't that surprising after all. The 9 Tribulations Tower was similar to the Skysite I-11 chessboard. Both probably originated from the Starry Sky. Knowing about the power of the Starry Sky was normal. "Do you think you're the only one who wields the power of the Starry Sky?" the masked figure said, as his form changed and his aura turned blue. Electric arcs also flashed around him. At this moment, Jian Wushuang not only felt shocked, but also sensed the opponent's origin source. Within that origin source, there was a hint of time. "Hurry up and make your move. You only have the time it takes for an incense stick to burn," the masked figure urged. Without further ado, Jian Wushuang didn't waste words. He gripped the hilt of his sword with his right hand and directly drew out the Wanjik sword. "The Starry Sky Chronicles." The first sword move. As the words fell, a monotonous green aura erupted within the solemn hall. Life. The moment he sensed the opponent's origin, he knew. Victory. A single sword strike. Life. Extinguished. That was death. Seemingly one sword strike, yet it was a dual sword strike. Life and death walked together. In this moment he truly felt it. the sensation of the blade piercing through the opponent's body. Clang. Sheathed the sword, smooth and seamless. Turning slowly, watching the opponent turn into a gray figure, he spoke, "You've lost. What sword technique did you just use?" Came the stiff voice from the masked figure. Jian Wushuang replied nonchalantly, "Starry Sky sword technique." "You're lying." The masked figure shook his head, refusing to believe it was the Starry Sky sword technique. He hailed from the starry sky. How could he have not seen such a technique? It even broke through his utmost freedom technique. "I have no reason to deceive you. This is the Starry Sky sword technique I've created. Perhaps it's not known as Starry Sky where you come from, but it's the Starry Sky I envisioned." Jian Wushuang's expression was impassive. At the moment of victory, he didn't feel much joy, because it seemed like he truly attained a sense of freedom. This state of mind was peculiar. He barely had time to savor it before it vanished. Perhaps the masked figure's body restored once more. As he looked at Jian Wushuang, there was a hint of peculiarity in his eyes. "You are the first practitioner to defeat me in our first encounter. No wonder you were chosen." The masked figure acknowledged Jian Wushuang's strength. It wasn't just his strength. What truly impressed him was Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship. Jian Wushuang raised an eyebrow and said, "Has anyone else come to the Nine Tribulations Tower before?" "Many have. Not long ago, a celestial maiden from your temporal river came here. It took her 10,000 attempts to defeat my avatar here at the first layer." Jian Wushuang was startled by this revelation. It wasn't that he found it too outrageous. It was the mention of the celestial maiden that stunned him. Not long ago. The other's sense of time was exaggerated. It had been billions of epochs since the fall of the celestial maiden. Tens of thousands of Kras. In other words, more than thousands of universe masters at the Eighth Tribulation were born and perished. What an immensely long epoch it had been. Yet, to the other, it seemed like just a short while ago. Could it be that the celestial maiden had not fallen yet? That was also a possibility. They had been intercepted by the celestial maiden when they entered here. It was Hu Qing who had stopped her. And Hu Qing had also fallen into the ancient moon ruins. That was where the celestial maiden had fallen. This had always been a puzzle. Now there was a chance to inquire about the celestial maiden's situation from the other party. But the response from the masked figure left him dumbfounded. The celestial maiden had indeed fallen, but her spirit remained in this world, which meant transcending reincarnation. Transcending reincarnation meant eternity. If she existed eternally, how could she fall? Jian Wushuang was utterly confused. Just as he was about to ask the figure, the masked person removed their mask. A delicate face appeared before him, neither male nor female. The complexion was ghastly pale, white hair, coiled atop the head, with a tall hairpin. Behind him, there was a huge circular ring, much wider than his body. "From now on, you can call me Weiss." As soon as the words fell, a scepter fell into Weiss's hand. The origin source and divine power aura on the figure disappeared. Now when Jian Wushuang looked at him, it was as if he were looking at thin air. If it weren't for his eyes, he wouldn't even sense the figure's presence with his thought power alone. When facing a universe master at the Seventh Tribulation, he would always feel a sun-like aura if they didn't deliberately hide it. But facing Weiss, Jian Wushuang didn't sense anything. It was very strange. Either the figure deliberately restrained his aura, or his strength far surpassed Jian Wushuang's. "Weiss," Jian Wushuang muttered to himself, then asked, "Can you now tell me the purpose of this Nine Tribulations Tower?" Weiss covered his mouth with a smile and said, "Of course. Now I am your master, and I can tell you everything you want to know." "Master?" Jian Wushuang exclaimed. "You want to be my master?" He hadn't expected such a bizarre thing to happen after refining a treasure. He even had to apprentice. But what he cared most about was still the Nine Tribulations Tower, whether it had any connection to Teacher Xianxia. Was it resonating with the Skysite Heavenly Chessboard because they were both temporal treasures, or because of Teacher Xianxia? Now the other party had come out and wanted him to be his disciple. It made Jian Wushuang feel a bit at a loss. But when he thought that even the celestial maiden had to attempt it tens of thousands of times before passing, and he could pass it in one go, a sense of satisfaction naturally arose. It seemed like apprenticing wouldn't be a loss. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath, ready to kneel down to apprentice, but was stopped by Weiss. You don't need to be so formal. In my world, the master-disciple relationship is just a tool. Weiss's words were straightforward, leaving Jian Wushuang momentarily unsure how to respond. Weiss continued, "You'll understand later. And about this tower, it's not called 9. Mid-sentence, Weiss seemed to remember something, then shook his head lightly, saying, "Let's just call it the 9 Tribulations Tower. Why did the celestial maiden fall while you're still alive?" Jian Wushuang spoke more freely in response to Weiss's directness. Upon hearing this, Weiss's expression froze for a moment. Then, he tapped Jian Wushuang's head with his scepter and said discontentedly, "I am a god. How could I die, huh?" After saying this, he covered his mouth and laughed. By common sense, the celestial maiden should have been his disciple, so it's no wonder he said it's just a tool. The disciple was dead, yet he continued to smile. "Are you a god? Have you existed since ancient times?" Jian Wushuang continued to inquire. The concept of gods was something he had never truly understood. In the mortal world, there were gods, but when it truly came down to it, he found that gods weren't all that remarkable. They could also be killed. Now, hearing someone claim to be a god once again, he was truly perplexed. Weiss cleared his throat twice, then spoke. "Are you referring to the 3 from the upstream spacetime? Ancient beings." In fact, it was just a term Jian Wushuang used. For those 3 truly peak experts, there wasn't a single complete name. They were called many things. Yes, those 3 super strong individuals. Their strength should be similar to the celestial maiden from back then. Jian Wushuang exclaimed excitedly. If that were true, then Weiss's strength would be difficult to gauge. To be able to produce someone like the celestial maiden. You're mistaken. The 3 you mentioned are also in the tribulation realm, just like the celestial maiden. These people have not yet broken free from their constraints. They cannot be considered gods. I am the true god of the entire river of time and space. Weiss finished speaking, his gaze becoming somewhat sharp. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but take a half-step back. In that moment, he was reminded of the gaze he had seen in the starry sky. Too powerful. It left one breathless. The concept of gods he now understood. Weiss claimed that only he was a god, the rest were still in the tribulation realm. The celestial maiden from before was probably also in the 9th tribulation. Beyond the 9th tribulation, there were even stronger beings. They just didn't exist in the river of time and space. Since you're the only god, why are you in this small tower? Jian Wushuang voiced his confusion. Someone so powerful, why would they be trapped in a small tower? And still take disciples as tools? This didn't make sense. The 9 Tribulations Tower is not as simple as you think. I am here on someone else's behalf. This is something I cannot tell you. Weiss's reply made Jian Wushuang think of teacher Xianxia. So he asked, on someone else's behalf? Is it an old man named Xianxia? Weiss simply shook his head without answering. Jian Wushuang was somewhat speechless. The person he was dealing with was a god. And yet, he knew nothing. It seemed that Jian Wushuang had no connection with teacher Xianxia. But how could the resonance from the SkySight heavenly chessboard be explained? According to Weiss, the SkySight heavenly chessboard didn't belong to spacetime. It was a treasure from the starry sky. The 9 Tribulations Tower was also a treasure from the starry sky. Though they were not. On the same level, they came from the same place. Hence, there was some resonance, ultimately unlocking the 9 Tribulations Tower. Jian Wushuang wasn't quite satisfied with this explanation. He wasn't interested in Weiss. To be precise, Weiss sounded too arrogant. He was determined to tread the path of the strong. Yet, he hadn't forgotten his original intention. Walking through spacetime, searching for teacher Xianxia, he also sought his own path. Not the guidance of gods. Seeing Jian Wushuang silent, Weiss began to speak about the 9 Tribulations Tower. Jian Wushuang, from now on you are my disciple. However, you cannot reveal my identity, and I won't care about your life or death. but I will teach you the most powerful secret technique in this spacetime. Your repayment to me will be becoming the strongest in this spacetime. Weiss stated his purpose. Jian Wushuang wasn't surprised by this. To become the strongest in this spacetime. It couldn't be said that the other party was arrogant. He had just witnessed their strength. To be honest, I'm not interested. Jian Wushuang shook his head. He had already created the Starry Sky Chronicles, and when he reached the Universe Master level, he could create even more powerful ancient variations. He didn't lack powerful secret techniques at all. He still had suspicions about the other's identity. He didn't want to create more karmic ties with people. When one ventures out, they must repay their debts. Becoming the number one in spacetime wasn't that easy. If the other party was just a true spirit, he might be tempted because he couldn't be bound. But the other was a god he couldn't fathom. Could they cooperate? He wasn't confident. Weiss seemed to have seen through Jian Wushuang. He lightly tapped the staff on the ground, and the scene around them instantly changed. Jian Wushuang, how much do you understand about spacetime? Weiss asked, lifting his hand to trace an arc. That was Jian Wushuang's lifeline. Simultaneously, it was Jian Wushuang's timeline. You came from the mortal world, traveled through many material realms, and then entered a peculiar universe. Let me see what you've experienced, Weiss said. The timeline that even the true spirits of Qishan Temple couldn't peek into appeared exceptionally simple in Weiss's eyes. Jian Wushuang was also startled. Looking up, he saw the entirety of his life from weakness to strength. Weiss glanced over Jian Wushuang's involvement with the divine power universe and nodded, saying, "No wonder your strength is so formidable. It's interesting. It seems someone has tampered with your cultivation path. They've touched something in this spacetime they shouldn't have. Unfortunately, I can't find him, otherwise, he would be punished." Alter time. Jian Wushuang was taken aback. Then he thought of his future self. His future self had failed in achieving the Tao merge. He had originally thought that he had succeeded in achieving Tao merge solely by his strength. But he didn't expect someone to change his timeline. And that person was not in this time. It couldn't be teacher Xianxia. He had already formed an answer deep in his heart, but he was somewhat unwilling to believe it. And then there was Weiss's remark. He dared to mention punishment. That meant he was on the same level as teacher Xianxia. Heavens! Weiss chuckled as he stared at Jian Wushuang. You don't need to be surprised. Time flows from the starry sky. Nothing is impossible. Your timeline is in my hands now, and no one can change it. Who is the one trying to change it? Why does this time not exist? Jian Wushuang seized the opportunity to pry into the secrets surrounding him. Il is nothing. In the current timeline, he simply doesn't exist. Perhaps, as he said, you will meet him in the future. Meet in the future. When will that be? Jian Wushuang fell silent, a hint of lamentation echoing in his heart. His current goal was to slay Mike Shang, and his future goal was to find teacher Xianxia. But what about beyond that? In his future, perhaps he would be very lonely, losing the meaning of cultivation. How sad. Weiss approached him at this moment, gently patting Jian Wushuang's shoulder and saying, "You don't need to be sad. The road ahead is long. The world you see is merely outlined. There's no need to cling to it. No, it's a world of flesh and blood. You high and mighty gods simply don't understand." Jian Wushuang shook his head. From the mundane mortal world to the present, he had experienced too much. Even if his Tao heart was complete, he still held a shred of respect for the secular world. Gods, they couldn't understand, because gods didn't come from weakness. As soon as the other spoke, Jian Wushuang guessed. The 9 Tribulations Tower. It seems I'm about to add another stroke to my story. Strength wasn't the goal. The purpose was the process of pursuing strength. That was the meaning of existence. Buzz. The resounding sound of high-pitched horns filled the air. On this day, powerful figures from all corners of Yu Kingdom gathered in the capital. The sacred assembly is upon us. Led by the Empress herself, the entire Yu Kingdom, along with various factions, split into 2 camps. One faction consisted of the royal family's elites. Naturally, they were loyal to the empress. Among them were Jian Wushuang and Wu Li, along with someone Wu Li had managed to sway. There were also some strong members from the royal family of Yu Kingdom. The other faction comprised members of 7-star sections. Elder Mukin was among them. The 7-star sects, in fact, were an affiliated sect of the 8-star sects, although it ostensibly belonged to the faction of the Ancient Wood sect. However, during the Sacred Assembly, they would assist the strong members of their own country while vying for favorable rankings. Under normal circumstances, this might not have caused much conflict. But this Sacred Assembly, the Empress was determined to make her mark. Those who could participate in this Sacred Assembly were all superpowers within the same realm. 4 powerful individuals at the Emperor realm. 2 from the royal family. Of course, Jian Wushuang and his wife were among them. The other 2 came from the Qingyun sect. As for the Universe Masters, there were 24 in total. Among them, only the Empress was at the level of the 5th tribulations. She was the one who needed full assistance this time. There were 4 Universe Masters at the 4th tribulation. 2 from the royal family, 1 from the Qingyun sect, and the patriarch of the 2nd most powerful family in Yu Kingdom, the Li family, personally joined the fray. The remaining Universe Masters were all at the pinnacle of the 3rd tribulation. They were strong individuals from various major clans and the 2 major forces. Today was the day they set out. Jian Wushuang happened to leave the 9 Tribulations Tower on this very day. Outside the Imperial Palace, with a cold voice resounding, all the strong individuals boarded the warships that had long been prepared. Set sail. The strong individuals participating in the Sacred Assembly boarded a separate warship. On both sides of this warship were 2 larger ones. Seated on these were some clan elders and prodigies among the emperors. When the Sacred Assembly began, there were often more spectators than participants. Just like this time, there were tens of thousands of spectators. But there were only a few dozen participants from Yu Kingdom. After boarding the warship, Jian Wushuang, Elder Mukin, and Wu Li sat together at a table. They chatted leisurely. Princess Jinshin, unusually quiet, sat silently on the side. Jian Wushuang knew what she was thinking. It was nothing but thoughts about Shurjiu. This was their chance to meet. Jian Wushuang had no interest in it at all. Leaving Yu Kingdom today, he might not come back. By then, he and Wu Li would have to go into hiding. Wu Li had already arranged the core members of the family before leaving. Jian Wushuang had nothing weighing on his mind, just thinking about where to go next. At the same time, he was also reminiscing about what happened inside the 9 Tribulations Tower. After becoming Weiss' disciple, he successfully entered the 9 Tribulations Tower for the 2nd time. Al began challenging Weiss' 2nd avatar. Unfortunately, he was no match at all. The gap was too wide, so he could only stay in the 1st level to cultivate. Cultivating in the 9 Tribulations Tower was nothing special in itself. The main thing was that practicing the secret techniques Weiss taught him went smoothly. Only within the 9 Tribulations Tower could he cultivate the secret techniques Weiss imparted. Moreover, it had to be his true self who went to practice. The utmost freedom intent. Technique. Jian Wushuang remembered Wei's display of the utmost freedom intent technique and couldn't help but marvel at its power. Cultivating it was extremely difficult. He couldn't even achieve the basics right now. It was an extremely long process. According to Weiss' estimation, he needed to reach the Universe Master level to even begin. Fortunately, he was powerful enough to wait. As long as he could grasp the basics of the utmost freedom intent technique, he would have a chance to pass the 2nd level of the 9 Tribulations Tower. Although cultivation was strenuous, its power was enough to make Jian Wushuang commit to it. Once he grasped the basics, his strength would skyrocket rapidly. But for now, he couldn't help himself. It would take time to refine his skills. On his way to the Ancient Wood sect, Jian Wushuang did not engage in cultivation either. In all aspects, he had reached the Emperor's limit. The origin source starry sky had already lit up countless black holes. It was only a step away from condensing into a physical universe. He also asked Weiss about the origin source universe. According to Weiss, the countless black holes were already perfect. Becoming the universe master didn't pose any pressure at all. But crossing the threshold into Tribulation Realm still required great effort. Becoming a Tribulation Realm cultivator was the key to mastering the universe. What Jian Wushuang lacked now was the opportunity to enter the Tribulation Realm. The sacred assembly was approaching unexpectedly. Ili's time was running out. In silence, Wu Li's expression changed, and he transmitted his voice. Jian Wushuang, do you have something on your mind? He hesitated for a moment, then looked at Wu Li, only then realizing that it was a transmission just now. Nothing much. The sacred assembly is about to begin. What could be on my mind? Jian Wushuang replied through voice transmission. What was on his mind? Way too much. But now wasn't the time to think about that. He couldn't afford to dwell on trivial matters anymore. He had to face reality squarely. This time Sacred Assembly would have many universe masters in the fifth tribulation, all much stronger than Jian Wushuang. Preparation was essential. Wu Li hadn't yet informed him of the details of the plan. Those needed discussion. But this wasn't the place for it. The two could only hold off on discussing and talk with Elder Mukin about the Sacred Assembly with a smile on their faces. The purpose of this Sacred Assembly was clear. It was to select the Holy Maiden candidate. Their task was to assist Fengqian, the Empress, in becoming the Iloli Maiden candidate. Once they became candidates, the rest was out of their hands. That would be the time for Jian Wushuang and Wu Li to execute their plan. The Saintess of the Ancient would sect needed to resonate with the Wanlu divine tree. No one could help the Empress with that. In the 16 kingdoms and some hidden forces in the Ancient Wood continent, there were at least hundreds of universe masters in the fifth tribulation. But there were fewer than 100 contenders for the position of Holy Maiden. Among these 100, there were only a few fully fledged universe masters in the fifth tribulation. And there were only 4 positions for candidates. For candidates to compete for the position of Holy Maiden. This would be the final battle. It didn't concern Jian Wushuang and the others much. But by seizing this opportunity to sneak into the Wanlu, the stakes became higher. Not only would it disrupt the Sacred Assembly, but it would also offend various forces. Yet these were all minor matters. The real terror would come after they entered. Being besieged by countless powerful individuals wouldn't just be about plundering treasures. They would also investigate how they managed to enter the Wanlu. That was the most crucial aspect. Wu Li had said that having the power of life would allow them to enter. At that time, he was somewhat incredulous, but now it seemed truly unbelievable. Certainly, some unique method was needed. He wasn't aware of this, but Wu Li was. He just couldn't ask. He could also tell that Wu Li wasn't simple. Fortunately, during this period, his strength had skyrocketed, and even if Wu Li was only half a step into the fourth tribulation, he was no match for Jian Wushuang. He wasn't afraid of any tricks the other party might pull. Il was only afraid that after being used up by the other party, the other would enter the Wanlu. That was what he had to worry about.